Chapter 496. When Chu Qingyan heard this, she immediately stopped smiling. Xi Ning had been by her side for so long, and she was no longer as loud as she used to be. If nothing serious had happened, she would not be so flustered. What happened? Tell me honestly. Chu Qingyan's calmness allowed Xi Ning to heave a sigh of relief. However, she quickly continued, Mistress, Lady Dugu is missing. This afternoon, I saw her walking around the courtyard. However, according to the servants, when they knocked on the door in the evening, no one answered. When they opened the door, they saw that the windows were wide open, but Lady Dugu was nowhere to be found. She has been missing for several hours now. I have asked many people, but no one has seen her. Chu Qingyan frowned. Although Dugu Qing was lively and active, she was not the kind of person who would go out without informing. She could not help but ask, Does young Master Yi know about this? Xi Ning nodded. Young Master Yi has sent people to look for her, but there is no news yet. I thought that you would be worried since you are so close to Miss Dugu, so I stood here and waited for you to inform you immediately. Chu Qingyan turned to face Xiao Su, but before she could speak, she heard him say, Xiao Lai cavalry is at your disposal. Chu Qingyan's eyes burned. How did Big Ice Cube know what she was going to say? She did not thank him. She knew that Big Ice Cube did not need this. Soon, Turin appeared in the study. Tu Ling, get a few men from the Xiao Lai cavalry who are adept at tracking. Start searching the surroundings of the Yi residence for Dugu Qing's whereabouts. Chu Qingyan gave the order without hesitation when she saw him. Master had already told them that the young princess's orders were his orders and no one was to disobey. Turin nodded. Big Ice Cube, I want to go and find Yi Lingfeng. Chu Qingyan turned to him. I will go with you. Xiao Su stood up and said indifferently. Chu Qingyan shook her head immediately. Sister Yenluo is grinding the ice crystal flowers pollen tonight. She will probably send the powder over later. You don't have to go over. It's fine. There's no need to rush the powder. Xiao Su was worried about her. Although he did not have much contact with Dugu Qing, he could see that the little fellow was very concerned about her. At this time, he wanted to stay by her side. Moreover, now that Dugu Qing had disappeared, he had to go and take a look at Yi Lingfeng. Chu Qingyan saw that he had made up his mind, so she didn't say anything more. The two of them headed towards the main courtyard together. When she just arrived at the main courtyard, she brushed past a few hurried servants. Chu Qingyan didn't pay much attention to them and went straight to the main hall of Yi Lingfeng's courtyard. As expected, Yi Lingfeng was standing in the middle of the hall. His hair hung down and covered his eyes, making it impossible to see his expression. Chu Qingyan strode forward. Young Master Yi, have you found Sister Dugu's whereabouts? When the two of them entered, Yi Lingfeng had already sensed them. However, at this time, he was very tired. This kind of tiredness was not physical, but came from the depths of his heart. As a result, he didn't want to move at all. No. There has been no news from evening until now. Yi Lingfeng turned around and sat down on a chair. He looked a little lost and absent-minded. It's almost the middle of the month now. That means that she has been missing for almost 8 hours. It's so late now. Where could she have gone? Chu Qingyan started to worry. Dugu Qing had always gone to bed early. She said that this was the only way to nourish her skin. This time, her disappearance was very strange. She definitely wouldn't disappear for no reason. Xiao Su, who had sensed that something was wrong with his good friend, frowned and looked at him. Did something happen to you? The person who had always been frivolous was unexpectedly so calm today. Moreover, there was a hint of loneliness in his calmness. This was not like him. When Xiao Su said this, Chu Qingyan immediately narrowed her eyes and looked at Yi Lingfeng. Did you two quarrel? Yi Lingfeng shook his head. Although his eyes were still bright and picturesque, his tone was somewhat depressed. Seeing Yi Lingfeng so listless for the first time, Chu Qingyan dispelled the idea of questioning. She heard from Xi Ning that Yi Lingfeng had sent people to search for Dugu Qing since evening. He didn't even eat dinner. He had been worried about Dugu Qing's whereabouts, so she couldn't help but lower her voice. Yi Lingfeng couldn't help but think of the conversation with Dugu Qing in the courtyard today. Yiling Feng, I've given up. In the future, I won't pester you anymore. You're like the wind. Perhaps the vast world belongs to you. I'm not the kind of person who pesters endlessly. From now on, you have a beautiful wife by your side. I hope you live a worry-free life. She smiled brightly, but her eyes were lingering with sorrow. Now that he thought about it, he discovered these details that he had overlooked. He closed his eyes and said with a disappointed tone, I hurt her heart today. She said she no longer had any hope for me. She's given up. What? Chu Qingyan's eyes widened. For a moment, she couldn't say anything. Such a stubborn and hot-blooded woman gave up just like that? How much determination did she have to make to be so ruthless to herself, to dig out the deep-rooted love in her heart? Yiling Feng, you don't have the right to hurt any woman who likes you. If you don't like her, you shouldn't have provoked her in the first place. If there's no hope, there's no disappointment. You know, a woman's heart is softer than a man's. It's easier to be moved and fall. Unlike you who can leave unscathed when you're tired of playing. Chu Qingyan couldn't help but lashed out. Along the way, everyone had seen everything that Dugu Qing had done for him. If she was a man, she would have long been moved. But she knew that being moved wasn't the same as liking her. She didn't agree with her blindly giving. But what she was more angry about was Yiling Feng's attitude. If you don't like her, then tell her directly. Let her give up early and not fall deeper and deeper. In the end, she can't give up no matter what. Chu Qingyan's every rebuke made Yiling Feng speechless. When he was at the border, he had told her very frankly that it was impossible between them. But after saying it for a long time, she didn't listen. So he didn't repeat himself. But he didn't know why. In the end, it became that he didn't want to continue. As if in his heart he wasn't willing. Because he hesitated. But he had never thought deeply about it. He was just used to having her by his side. But today, it seemed that he was wrong. Chu Qingyan still wanted to continue, but seeing Yiling Feng's distracted look, she angrily stomped her feet and leaned against the chair to sit down. Let's wait for the news first. Xiao Su comforted her. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips and almost cried, Where can she go this late? I'm really worried that something bad might happen to her. When she said that, Yiling Feng's body suddenly stiffened. After a moment, Turin hurried into the main courtyard. Chapter 497. The moment Turin entered, Chu Qingyan immediately stood up and asked, How's the investigation going? Turin cupped his hands and replied, According to the spies, Miss Dugu was seen leaving from the city gate at around 7 in the evening. She should have left the imperial capital by now. Left? Chu Qingyan frowned. Can you tell if it was voluntary or forced? It was voluntary, and Miss Dugu seemed to be in a hurry. There were 4 or 5 bodyguards following her. I couldn't see their faces, but from their movements, I could tell that their martial arts were not weak. Turin reported truthfully. Upon hearing this, Chu Qingyan heaved a sigh of relief. It was good to know that she was fine. However, just as she put down her worries, they arose again. She left in a hurry without leaving a word, and there were a few more bodyguards around her. She left the imperial capital in the middle of the night. Could it be that something urgent had happened and she didn't have the time to tell everyone? Chu Qingyan frowned again. Not only did Chu Qingyan think so, but Yiling Feng also thought so. Unless something big happened that caught her unprepared, she wouldn't have left in such a hurry. Turin, did she go in the direction of Xiang? Yiling Feng suddenly asked. Turin nodded. If she keeps going in that direction, she should be in Xiang. Xiang? Chu Qingyan was puzzled. Why Xiang? Yiling Feng didn't hide anything and said, She's from Xiang. She just arrived in Jiang this year. If there's something urgent, she should have returned to Xiang. Chu Qingyan's face revealed a look of understanding. She clapped her hands and her eyes brightened. She said to the person beside her joyfully, Big Ice Cube, aren't we going to Xiang? Then we can track Sister Dugu all the way. It's best if we can find her. Knowing that she was safe and sound and was from Xiang, she thought that they would meet again as long as fate willed it. Seeing that the little fellow's emotions had calmed down, Xiao Su nodded. If you're worried, you can ask Xiao Lai to search for her. Chu Qingyan nodded. Although she had not spent much time with Dugu Qing, She knew that Duguqing was not someone who did not have her own opinions. Duguqing was able to handle everything on her own. As long as Chu Qingyan spread the news, she believed that Duguqing would take the initiative to contact them if needed. It was almost late at night. Chu Qingyan thought about the ice crystal flowers powder and was about to drag Big Ice Cube back to their room. But before they left, Chu Qingyan turned back to look at Yi Lingfeng and said with regret, "Young Master Yi, I have to say that you missed a good girl. I used to think that everyone has their own way of life. Whether it's passionate, devoted, or promiscuous, it's all their own choice. There's nothing wrong with that. But it's best if you don't hurt others. Also, do you think it's really good to indulge yourself and live a carefree life like this? Love is actually a very sacred thing. If possible, I hope you can treat it seriously in the future. Then, when you're old, you won't regret missing out on it and won't toss and turn in bed because of it." After Chu Qingyan finished speaking, she didn't look at him anymore and turned to leave. Behind her, after hearing Chu Qingyan's words, Yi Lingfeng looked out of the window. The moonlight was bright and the clouds were thin. At this moment, his emotions were complicated and at a loss. What's wrong with me? After Duguqing left, his entire person started to feel strange. Is it because he rejected her confession and felt guilty? Or is it because he was worried about her leaving? The romantic young master who had always been free and easy, at this moment, started to be unable to see his own heart clearly. Chu Qingyan's words, he heard them and they weren't wrong. Duguqing was indeed a good girl, but she met the wrong person. He wasn't a man who was willing to stay for others. The life he wanted wasn't two people looking at each other face to face all day long. However, if he were to be asked again, was this really the kind of life he wanted? Perhaps he was already uncertain. After rejecting her, he started to question his own thoughts. Was it right? Or was it wrong? Usually, his pair of peach blossom eyes were unrestrained and unrestrained. His eyes were slightly raised and countless charm flowed in them, causing countless women to fall for him one after another. Confident, affectionate, gentle, handsome, there was always something that could hit the soft spot in a woman's heart. But at this time, his peach blossom eyes were still charming. Unfortunately, they had lost their previous affectionate look and were a little lost. You're called Yi Lingfeng? Yi as in easy? Ling as in Lingyun? Feng as in the wind? Then, when put together, wouldn't it be easy to fly freely between heaven and earth like the wind? It looks like your character is very similar to yours. Just like a dandelion, your feet don't have roots. That was the first time they met, and she had explained his name in a childish manner. This was the first time he had heard that his name could be explained like this. But she was wrong. He didn't have a heart, not that his feet didn't have roots. Big brother Ling Feng, what kind of girl do you like? Will she wash her hands and make soup for you? Or will she play the zither and play chess with you? Or will she help you manage the household? She tilted her head with a longing smile on her face, but her tone was very serious. At that time, when the two of them were together, he originally thought that this little girl wasn't easy to coax. She didn't have the temper of a spoiled young lady, so being with her was very relaxing. He wanted to stay with her for a few more days, but hearing her ask this, he felt that this girl's heart had been moved. She was a kind girl and he couldn't hurt her, so he chose to leave. It was better to have a short pain than a long pain. Big brother Ling Feng, since you're going to marry and have children in the future, can I line up first? When you want to get married, I'll be your first choice, all right? When she chased after him, she couldn't catch up to him in the city, so she flew to the roof of the restaurant and shouted at him. He could still remember that day under the bright sunlight, her dazzling eyes. Memories appeared in his mind bit by bit and then slipped away. The last thing that stayed in his ears was the last thing she said to him. I like you, that's my business, it has nothing to do with you. If you didn't come forward that day on the street, perhaps the next time I meet you, my heart will also be moved because you are my type. Whether it's a step earlier or a step later, it doesn't make a difference. She said this with a smile. Just like in the past few months, she had never shown any expression other than this smile in front of him. A sleepless night. A night of sitting. A night of being in a daze. When Yi Lingfeng opened his eyes, the first rays of the morning sun had already risen and the sky was already slightly bright. He never thought that time would pass so quickly. At this time, a servant came in to report, Young Master Xiao's group has already gotten up and is preparing to leave. They're leaving? Xianghua? His eyes suddenly opened wide as he made a decision in his heart. Chapter 498. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor, Endless Fantasy Translation. The luggage and carriage were all ready. Chu Qingyan and Xiao Su stood at the entrance of the courtyard, watching the servants moving in and out. Having slept late last night, Chu Qingyan was still a little sleepy. If not for the people beside her, she would have collapsed on the ground. Kai, where's little Qing? Mr. Chu glanced at the crowd and found that everyone was here except for Duguqing. He looked around and asked. News of Duguqing's departure had not spread yet, so it was normal that Father Chu did not know. Chu Qingyan opened her eyes and mumbled. She went home. She left last night. Maybe she was in a hurry and did not inform everyone. Hearing this, Father Chu fell silent and lowered his head, thinking about something. Chu Qingyan was still sleepy and did not notice her father's disappointment. At this time, when everyone was ready, Yi Lingfeng's figure appeared in the courtyard. Chu Qingyan yawned and looked at Yi Lingfeng, who was rushing over. She straightened and asked, Young Master Yi, are you here to send us off? No need, we left early. You should go back and rest. Although she had scolded him last night, Chu Qingyan still treated him as a friend in her heart. That was because Big Ice Cube's friend was her friend. Furthermore, it was rare for someone like Big Ice Cube to have a friend who could be considered a national treasure. No matter how angry she was, she would control herself. Otherwise, what if the national treasure ran away? I'm not here to send you off, I want to go with you. Yi Lingfeng said, and the servants behind him moved the luggage into the carriage. This action woke Chu Qingyan up completely. She looked at Yi Lingfeng in confusion, then turned to look at the busy servants. In the end, she could only look at Big Ice. Xiao Su raised his brows. Why are you going to Shang country? I don't remember your Yi family's business expanding to other countries. Yi Lingfeng, who was directing the servants, turned around when he heard this. He lowered his eyes slightly, as if thinking about how to explain. Father Chu, who had been silent on the side, suddenly spoke. Little Feng, was it you who made little Qing run away in anger? Father Chu pointed at him angrily. Chu Qingyan clicked her tongue. She had to admit that sometimes her father's blind guesses were right. However, now was not the time to admire her father. She stepped forward and held his hand. Smiling, she advised, Father, don't be angry. Sister Dugu left because she had something urgent to attend to. Don't worry. Her home is in Shang country. If we are lucky, we might meet her there. Mr. Chu nodded, but his anger had not subsided. He glared at Yi Lingfeng. But I still want to scold you. You didn't even visit little Qing'er when she was sick. You're too disappointing. In the future, if I have delicious food, I'll give it to Little Blossom, Dakiki, and Cutie Meng. I won't give it to you. After saying that, Chu Machen's father snorted coldly and swaggered toward his wife. Xiaohua was a cat raised in the Yi family's kitchen. In order to prevent mice, she had given birth to 3 kittens a few days ago. Thus, her father named them Dadada, Kiki, and Cutie. Chu Qingyan listened to her father with some shame. When she turned to look at Yi Lingfeng, she saw that his expression was a little stiff. She could not help but sigh softly. At this moment, she heard Yi Lingfeng's soft voice. Brother Xiao, I want to go to Shang country to see if she is safe. If she is, I will come back. No one had interacted with Duguqing as long as he had. She had left in such a hurry that something big must have happened. He could not pretend that he did not know anything. If he was asked how he felt about Duguqing now, he did not know. He did not want to think too deeply about it. He was afraid of the answer. He only wanted his heart to be at ease. Xiao Su frowned. You still have a large family business to take care of. This trip will take a long time. Why don't we find her and send the news back to you? Yi Lingfeng shook his head and rejected his good friend's offer. No, I have to go and see for myself. Otherwise, I will not be at ease. Hearing this, Xiao Su looked at him suspiciously. Are you regretting it? Regret? Yi Lingfeng was stunned. Then, under his good friend's gaze, he braced himself and replied, "What is regret? There is no such word in my life." Xiao Su shook his head, a little angry at his failure to fight back. "There is no such word in your life, but it is written all over your head. Lingfeng, I have told you before that you should stop when it's time to stop. Otherwise, it will be too late for regrets. You don't listen to good advice and will suffer losses in front of you. If you really decide to go to Shang country, I will not stop you. But I hope that you will think carefully about what you want in your heart. Otherwise, when you find that girl and hurt her a second time, that is not what a gentleman should do." With that, Xiao Su led the little fellow, who was about to fall, into the carriage. He lowered his head and said softly, "Don't sleep standing up. If you fall, you will be embarrassed. Go back to the carriage and sleep." At this point, Chu Qingyan could no longer listen to what he was saying. She had given herself to him and was in charge of walking with her eyes closed. Yi Lingfeng was a little stunned by his good friend's words. His good friend did not often lecture him and Feng Yi because he felt that there was no need. Today, he said so much which made him feel flattered. But his good friend's words made sense. What did he want? Yi Lingfeng originally thought that Xiao Su was doing it for his own good. Little did he know that Xiao Su was actually doing it for his little fellow. Chu Qingyan cared a lot about her friend, Duguqing. If anything happened to Duguqing, she would be sad. But he did not want to see her sad, so he said those words to Yi Lingfeng. If Yi Lingfeng knew the truth, he would definitely regret befriending such a person who valued women over friends. After getting into the carriage, Chu Qingyan lay down on the couch while Xiao Su leaned against the wall and closed his eyes to rest. After moving her limbs on the couch, Chu Qingyan automatically turned over and rolled into Xiao Su's arms. Then, she found a comfortable position in his arms and prepared to sleep. She closed her eyes the whole time. The reason why she was so familiar with it was because she had done it many times before. And she could distinguish the smell on Big Ice Cube, so everything was done smoothly. Xiao Su was already used to her actions. He reached out to take the blanket beside him and covered her with it. During this time, he did not even open his eyes. It was all based on his feelings. They were like an old couple who had been married for decades. The wheels rolled over the dead branches and started to turn. They drove out of the Yi residence and slowly left the capital of Jiang country. Jiang Yunyao stood at the top of the palace and looked down at the capital with a smile. "Qingyan, I wish you a safe journey." At this moment, Chu Qingyan was smacking her lips in her sleep. Carrot did not want to eat, did not want to eat, did not want to eat. Poor Chu Qingyan. Even in her sleep, she did not forget to scold Carrot. "Carrot, I am very cute, okay? You have eyes but can't recognize Carrot, Carrot." Chapter 499. Translator, Endless Fantasy Translation Editor. Endless Fantasy Translation. Big Ice Cube made an exception for her in the previous chapter. When they left Jiang Kingdom, the sky was still clear and sunny. However, as they traveled further, the sky was covered with gray clouds. Looking at the horizon, it was as if the heavens and earth had merged together. The mountains in the distance were no longer visible. Chu Qingyan was greeted by such a scene when she woke up. She rubbed her eyes and asked the man who was flipping through a book, "Did I sleep the whole day? Why is it so dark now?" "You slept for 4 hours." Xiao Su put down the book and looked out the window. His expression was indifferent. "It should be snowing soon." "Snowing?" His head, which was still a little muddled, suddenly sobered up when he heard those 2 words. She leaned against the window and said expectantly, "I haven't seen what snow looks like. If I can see it with my own eyes, it will fulfill my wish for many years." Xiao Su didn't think much of it. When he was at the border, it happened to be deep in the mountains. Every winter, snow was a common occurrence. To them, snow was the last thing they liked when they were marching to war. It meant that it would be more difficult to defend. Xiao Su pondered for a moment when he saw how happy she was. Then he said, "If there's a chance in the future, I'll take you to Mount Lu." Chu Qingyan nodded eagerly. Then she realized, is Mount Lu a mountain range at the border of Sichuan? Xiao Su nodded. "I've been there for 4 or 5 years. There's no summer there, only spring and winter. If you want to see snow, it's a good place to go. Chu Qingyan cupped her face and smiled happily. This was the first time Big Ice Cube had told her where to go. She couldn't wait to go to Mount Lu. Big Ice Cube, after you cure the poison, we'll go there. Maybe we'll reach Mount Lu next winter. Okay. Last night, Yen Luo had told them that the ice crystal flower was not only a treasure, but its leaves were also useful. Therefore, she had to study it first before she could give them the powder made from the ice crystal flower. Chu Qingyan counted with her fingers. They still had 20 days, and there were only 15 days left until New Year's Eve. After New Year's Eve, she would be a year older. Thinking back to this year, many things had happened. She suddenly transmigrated, inexplicably got married, and had a fiancé. Then, she started to scheme and scheme. She felt that it was already a blessing from the heavens to be able to live through this year peacefully. Chu Qingyan smiled and said slowly, Big Ice Cube, we thought we wouldn't be able to get these 3 rare herbs. Now that we've found 2 of them, I believe we can also find the love grass. She recalled the time when she saw Big Ice Cube covered in blood at the medical center. She was so scared that she only dared to clench her teeth to stop herself from crying. Now, he was sitting in front of her, safe and sound. It was hard to imagine how she had survived back then. Big Ice Cube, I'm hungry. She had a lot of things to say now, but those things had already passed. Chu Qingyan blinked, hiding the sadness in her eyes. She leaned closer to him, leaned her head on his shoulder, and said softly that she was hungry. When Xiao Su heard that, he took the pastries from the food box and handed it to her. Eat something to fill your stomach first. There's still an hour before we reach the town in front. Chu Qingyan took the pastries from his hands in satisfaction. Big Ice Cube was treating her better and better. It was great. They were going to Shang country this time, and they were taking a shortcut. Jiang country and Shang country were separated by mountains as a natural barrier, so it meant that they would have to climb over several mountains to reach Shang country. At the very most, if they traveled faster, they would reach Shang country in about 5 days. Half an hour later, the group stopped in a town to rest. After eating and feeding the horses, the group continued on their journey. Now, time was like a bowl of water in a drought. They couldn't spill it, and had to cherish it very, very much. If everything went smoothly, they would reach the first mountain in the evening. Xiao Su glanced at the sky and then gazed into the distance at the mountain range that was faintly discernible in the clouds. He seemed to be deep in thought. At that moment, Chu Qingyan was feeling a little bored. She reached out to tap the water in her cup and wrote something on the table. Xiao Su glanced at the words on the table and raised his eyebrows in confusion. Snow muscle pill? What's that? When I was at the Blue Manor, I saw a man exchanging this item. I felt that the man was looking at me strangely, so I subconsciously remembered what he was holding. I recalled it in the afternoon and asked Sister Yen Luo about it. She told me that the snow muscle elixir has a nice name, but it isn't used to beautify or nourish one's skin. Instead, it is used to regulate one's internal energy, especially for people with congenital deficiencies, such as those who were born prematurely. Chu Qingyan looked at the words on the table and explained slowly. In short, it was useful for people with congenital deficiencies. Xiao Su nodded and didn't take this matter to heart. Just as Chu Qingyan and company were hurrying on their way, a black shadow snuck into the third prince's palace in the Xixian nation's imperial palace 1,000 miles away. Master, I've brought the thing you wanted from the Blue Manor. The black-robed man knelt down in front of Xiao Ho. This was the man that Chu Qingyan had met once at the Blue Manor. Xiao Ho raised his hand and the man beside him took the box and handed it to him. He lifted his fingers and opened it. The jade-colored pill caught his eye. Xiao Ho curled his lips and smiled. Not bad. You've done a good job. I'll reward you handsomely. This is what I should do. The man in black bowed his head. Then he seemed to recall something and reported, Master, when I was at the Blue Manor, I saw a woman who looked very similar to Chu Qingyan. However, the man beside her wasn't the King of England. What was that woman doing at the Blue Manor? Xiao Ho raised his eyebrows and asked. She seemed to be looking for some kind of medicinal herb. I'm not very sure. However, because I've seen Chu Qingyan before, I had some impression of her voice and figure. When I saw her at the Blue Manor, I felt that she was familiar and paid a little attention. The man in black answered truthfully. Xiao Ho frowned and thought for a moment. Then, a light flashed in his eyes. We've fallen into a misconception. We thought that Xiao Su was in Sichuan. However, we couldn't find any trace of him. It's very likely that he's already left Sichuan and fled to another kingdom. His subordinate's discovery gave him a wake-up call. He immediately ordered, take out a group of people and start searching from the surrounding kingdoms. Junlan, Jiang, Shang, Nensong, don't let a single one go. If Xiao Su is dead, I want to see his corpse. If he's alive, I also want to see his corpse. He didn't believe that Xiao Su's life was so tough that even snake's kiss poison couldn't kill him. So many assassins couldn't kill him. He didn't mind ending his short life with his own hands. If you find any trace of him, spread the news. I want him to have no way to escape. Yes, Your Highness. Chapter 500. Sometimes, the more you want something, the more you can't get it. Just like now, they were anxious and wanted to rush to Shang country, but the weather was not on their side and it started to rain. In the middle of nowhere, there was nowhere to hide. Everyone could only hide in the car and listen to the pitter-patter of the rain hitting the roof of the car. When it rains, it pours. Chu Qingyan's face was gloomy. She hated the weather. If it wasn't for the rain, they could have crossed the mountain today. They wanted to continue in the rain, but the sky was getting darker and darker. They couldn't even see the road clearly. In order to prevent accidents from happening, they could only stop. Listening to the little one's complaint, Xiao Su looked at the sky and thought for a moment. Suddenly, the corner of his mouth raised into a mysterious smile. Later, there might be a surprise. He lowered his head and said to Chu Qingyan, "Surprise? What surprise? I only hope that there won't be any surprises." Chu Qingyan lifted her head and looked at him dispiritedly. All she wanted to do now was to hurry on with her journey. If the heavens could stop the rain immediately, she would definitely ask Xining to buy more things for her. Xiao Su couldn't help but laugh at her puckered-up face. The rain should stop in about an hour. Really? Chu Qingyan lifted her head, her eyes sparkling as she looked at the huge block of ice in front of her. Looking at her little face that instantly regained its glow, Xiao Su couldn't help but smile gently. The little one was easily satisfied. People who were content with what they had were always kind-hearted. As Xiao Su expected, half an hour later, the rain stopped. The sky that was shrouded in dark clouds slowly regained its light. However, the clouds were still very thick, as if they were about to touch the ground. Chu Qingyan beamed from ear to ear. "Big Ice Cube, you are a god. How did you know that the rain would stop? Not only will the rain stop, it will also snow later." Xiao Su accepted her praise with a calm expression. He picked up the lid of the teacup with his fingers and gently stirred the tea leaves floating on the surface of the water. "What? Snow?" Chu Qingyan immediately turned her head to look out of the window. At this time, compared to before, the world was a little more spacious and bright. Suddenly, white things began to float in the air. That was... Chu Qingyan blankly stretched out her hand, and a piece of white snow fell into her palm. It was a little cold, and then it fell into her hand one after another. She carefully held the snowflake and presented it to Xiao Su as if it were a treasure. "Big Ice Cube, look, it's snow." Although he was used to seeing these snowflakes, Xiao Su couldn't help but seriously look at the snowflakes in her hand under the influence of her happy mood. They were small and fragmented, lying in her palm, making her hand look pink and cute. "Yes, it's snow." He finished the appraisal. Big Ice Cube's expression was very calm, and she felt like Granny Lu who was entering the city for the first time. She suddenly remembered that Big Ice Cube used to be stationed near Lu Mountain. Seeing snow was as easy as eating a home-cooked meal. However, this was her first time. Even though she knew that the person in front of her didn't think much of it, she still wanted to share her joy with him. "Big Ice Cube, do you know that where we come from, snow represents romance? Walking in the snow is like walking in a fairy tale world." Chu Qingyan thought of the idol dramas she watched in the past. Her whole body began to emit pink bubbles, and her eyes were filled with longing. Unfortunately, as soon as she finished speaking, a certain unromantic person poured a bucket of cold water on her. If the snow is too heavy, you'll have to crawl back after walking out. Chu Qingyan's mouth twitched. Big Ice Cube, can you not spoil the fun? However, the reality seemed to be like what Big Ice Cube said. The snow didn't get heavier, but the snow on the ground was getting thicker. Master, if this continues, we can't continue to move forward. Otherwise, it's very likely that we'll be trapped. Turin rode over and discussed outside the carriage. Find a spacious place to set up camp. Xiao Su didn't hesitate and immediately gave the order. Yes. Turin immediately sent someone to find a suitable place in front of them. In less than 10 minutes, the person came back. Master, there's a plum forest on the mountainside in front of us. The terrain is flat and there are more trees. It's convenient for us to set up camp for the night. Turin quickly came to report. Okay, let's go now. We've just arranged everything before dark. Xiao Su didn't think much and told Turin. Seeing that Big Ice Cube was familiar with the arrangements and wasn't worried at all about the possibility of being trapped in the deep mountains, Chu Qingyan thought that when would she be like Big Ice Cube, knowing everything and being able to make the most reasonable and correct judgment at any time? She thought in her heart and directly asked. Xiao Su was a little relieved when he heard that, because his little fellow had been growing and didn't stagnate. It all depends on the accumulation of experience. If you fall a lot, you'll know how to walk at night. This wasn't perfunctory, but speaking from experience. Although Big Ice Cube said it very simply, it was the truth. If you want to be able to write poems and songs at your fingertips, then you must be familiar with the poems of the Tang and Song dynasties. If you want to know poetry, calligraphy, and painting, then you must spend more time than others to learn. If you want to become a great talent with a broad mind, then you must have an extremely high IQ and experience. More often than not, an armchair strategist would only fail miserably. While the two were talking, the carriage had already arrived at the plum forest that Turin mentioned. Because it was snowing heavily after the rain, when they got off the carriage, they stepped on the snow on the road. As soon as Chu Qingyan stood still, she saw the wood spirit standing in a large open space, gesturing about something. Then, the fierce cavalry hidden in the dark suddenly appeared. They were holding hammers, saws, and nails in their hands, and quickly approached the wood spirit. And Turin brought people who chopped wood from God knows where, and transported it in large batches to the wood spirit. Just as Chu Qingyan was puzzled, she heard the wood spirit order, "Start working." Then, she saw the fierce cavalry quickly use the tools in their hands. Some moved wood, some hammered wood, some sawed wood. Everyone had a clear division of labor. Occasionally, there would be sounds of conversation, but basically, they were all working quickly and silently. Under Chu Qingyan's stunned gaze, the outline of a house appeared out of thin air. Then, at a speed visible to the naked eye, it moved from bottom to top. It was like a painting, and the house appeared in front of her just like that. An hour later, a house that could accommodate 30 to 40 people stood in the middle of the plum blossom forest. The design of this house was very similar to the E-residence. The trees that the earth spirit looked for were basically dozens or hundreds of years old. Therefore, the entire building gave people a feeling of sturdiness and solemnity. Chu Qingyan stood under Xiao Su's umbrella and murmured, "I seem to have witnessed a real magic show with my own eyes." Chapter 501. While Chu Qingyan was staring at the scene with her mouth agape, Qing Yenluo and her parents had also alighted from the carriage to witness the uncanny workmanship with their own eyes. Their mouths were so wide open that one could stuff an egg into them. A house that would take at least 3 months or even half a year to build was actually completed in less than half a day right under their noses. This was unheard of. As for Yi Lingfeng and Ethereal, they were already used to it. When they were outside, they often had to eat and sleep in the open, so Mu Ling's skills were always useful at crucial moments. Chu Qingyan muttered to the people around her, "Big Ice Cube, I realize that everyone around you is capable." Xiao Su's lips curled up slightly. When he had first trained them, he had formulated a training plan based on each of their characteristics. Now, each of them had their own specialties and were considered top-notch in their respective fields. He had not let his years of training go to waste. At this moment, Mu Ling had just put down the blueprints in his hands when he saw Chu Qingyan's father running towards him happily. He was even yelling, "Blockhead, you're too awesome. Hurry up and build me a pagoda. I want to pluck the stars tonight." Everyone was speechless. Mu Ling looked at Chu Qingyan's father, who was grabbing onto his clothes and not letting go. He wanted to cry but had no tears. Could he just pretend that he didn't hear anything? She looked at her master for help, but unfortunately, her master ignored her. In the end, Mu Ling personally built a human-sized wooden pagoda for Chu Qingyan's father. Only then did Chu Qingyan reluctantly accept it. Everyone brought their luggage and checked into the large courtyard of the house, which was simple on the outside but grand on the inside. As Xiao Su had said, the snow was getting heavier and heavier. A thick layer of snow had already accumulated on the ground. Fortunately, Mu Ling had raised the height of the threshold when he was building the house, so the snow did not pile up to the doorway. In addition, Turin had chosen a high position, so the snow did not pile up to a certain extent. Everyone ate early and returned to their rooms. Chu Qingyan was not sleepy because she had slept too long during the day, so she stayed in the study with Xiao Su. Outside the window, snowflakes rustled down, creating a vast expanse of whiteness. She couldn't help but think of a poem she had learned in the past. Thousands of miles of ice, thousands of miles of snow. Looking inside and outside the Great Wall, there was only the boundless expanse of the Great Wall. Up and down, suddenly surging with torrential waves. The mountains danced like silver snakes, the plains galloped like wax elephants, wanting to compete with the Heaven Duke for height. The snowy scenery was magnificent, but at this speed, they would be trapped in the mountains and unable to move. Big Ice Cube, when will this snow stop? She turned around and ran back to his side, anxiously asking. Seeing the impatience on her face, Xiao Su's lips curled into a teasing smile. Didn't you say you wanted to enjoy the snowy scenery? Isn't this a good time? You can take a good look at the romantic snow. Chu Qingyan was embarrassed. She liked the snowy scenery very much. If it was another time in another place, she would like it even more. But now, what she needed was time. I don't want to see snow now. Chu Qingyan's words carried a trace of annoyance. When she passed by the courtyard just now, she heard Turin and Wood Spirit talking. They said that if this snow continued for 2 or 3 more days, they would be trapped in this deep mountain. Xiao Su suddenly understood why she was so anxious. He couldn't help but put away the joke at the corner of his mouth. He reached out and pulled her closer to him, then said softly, "It's okay, we're not in a hurry. Fire Spirit is still looking for information. I believe this time it won't take as much time and energy as it did in Jiang country. I also don't want to be in a hurry, but I can't help it." Chu Qingyan relaxed her body and leaned on his shoulder. Her voice sounded troubled and aggrieved. "I'm afraid we won't be able to move forward for the next few days. You should find something to do, then you won't think too much," Xiao Su suggested. Chu Qingyan frowned. "What can I do in this deep mountain forest? If not, I can go catch a few rabbits with Daddy to play with. When the snow stops, I'll take you out for a walk." Xiao Su patted her head. Looking at her pouting and vexed expression, he only found it funny. Chu Qingyan nodded. Since she had nothing to do, this was the only way. At this moment, there was a light knock on the door. Chu Qingyan walked over and opened the door. She found Qing Yanluo standing outside. "Sister Yanluo, what's the matter?" Chu Qingyan stepped aside to let her in. She then closed the door. The wind outside was really cold. Qing Yanluo had a bright smile on her face. After entering the door, she joyfully said to the two of them, "I've studied the use of the ice crystal flower. It's better than I imagined. I've already turned the petals into powder and made a total of 10 pills. Your Highness should take 1 pill every day. After 10 days, half of the poison in your body will be neutralized. Then, when we get the love grass, we can neutralize the other half of the poison." As soon as she finished speaking, Chu Qingyan cried tears of joy. She hugged Xiao Su's hand and cheered, "That's great, that's great." Her eyes reddened as she spoke. Her voice was hoarse and choked with sobs. Xiao Su put one arm around her shoulder and the other hand gently stroked her black hair behind her head, comforting her who was so excited at the moment. He had seen great storms and waves in his daily life, and he had often been on the brink of death several times, so he was already used to life and death. Now that someone was crying in his arms, just because he had a chance to live, it was as if after walking for so many years, he was no longer alone. Now that there was someone who shared his joys and sorrows, it would be a lie to say that he was not moved. Cheng Yanluo looked at the two of them warmly hugging each other, and her heart was moved. Relying on each other in life and death, never leaving each other, sharing joys and sorrows, holding hands with one's child. That was the most beautiful process of love. Cheng Yanluo looked at them again and felt that she was an outsider. It was better not to disturb them. Thus, she left the room and closed the door carefully. She sighed softly and turned to leave. But then she saw a figure standing in the snow. Ethereal was standing in the courtyard, looking up into the distance. His gaze was a little unfocused. Snowflakes fell from his body one by one. There was a lot of snow on his shoulders. He must have been standing there for a while. Suddenly, he felt something strange. He looked up and saw an umbrella covering his head. He was slightly stunned. He slowly turned his head and saw someone standing beside him. It was Xiao. The two of them looked at each other wordlessly, separated by the umbrella handle. In the end, Cheng Yanluo passed the umbrella to him and said coldly, "Hold on to it. You must be crazy to come and look at the snow at this time." Then she turned to leave. But the footsteps behind her followed. She stopped and said impatiently, "Why are you following me?" Ethereal smiled faintly. "The snow is too heavy. I'll send you back." Cheng Yanluo saw that more than half of the umbrella was moving towards her. An inexplicable emotion welled up in her heart. "Up to you." Her tone carried a hint of anger that even she herself didn't notice. The two of them followed suit, but they didn't know if their hearts were only separated by the umbrella handle. Chapter 502. It had been snowing for the entire night. Looking into the distance, it was a vast expanse of white. It was hard to tell where the sky was and where the mountains were. After Chu Qingyan had breakfast, she went out for a stroll. Now, the snow had become smaller. It was like a drizzle, floating down gracefully. She wanted to go out and find something to do. Just like what Big Ice Cube said, to kill time so that she would not find it hard to pass time. But after wandering around for a long time, she still did not find anything interesting. She could not help but feel a little depressed. But after taking 2 steps, she heard the sound of weapons clashing coming from the courtyard next door. She could not help but curiously follow the sound. Pushing open the door of the courtyard, she saw Turin with his hands behind his back and the fierce cavalry who were practicing their martial arts. Hearing the sound behind him, Turin turned around. When he saw the young princess, he bowed. "Turin, are you organizing training now?" She walked over and her eyes fell on the fierce cavalry. It was the first time she saw so many of them training. "That's right. According to the weather, it will snow for a few more days. Why don't we use this opportunity to let everyone train so that they will not neglect their martial arts?" In the past, the subordinates had a fixed training time every day. In order to prevent their martial arts from becoming rusty, they can also strive for perfection. Turin explained as he went forward to correct the posture of one of the fierce cavalry. Chu Qingyan nodded secretly. There was no end to learning. Be prepared for danger in times of peace. This was the requirement that the fierce cavalry had for themselves. It was also because of this that they became the elite troops that everyone feared. She raised her head and looked at the warm sunlight shining on the branches. The sparkling white snow emitted a bright light. Then, when it fell into her eyes, it slowly gathered into a small cluster of fire. It seemed that she had already found what she needed to do in the next few days. "Turin, I want to join you." She heard her voice slowly say. Turin, who was observing Xiao Lai's cavalry, stilled when he heard this. He turned to look in disbelief at the young Wang Fei beside him. "It is winter now. If you practice martial arts in the snow, I'm afraid." Chu Qingyan didn't wait for him to finish and cut him off. With her hands behind her back, she smiled. "Martial artists don't have 4 seasons. I remember you were the one who told me this. But if the master knew that the little princess was practicing martial arts in such cold weather, he would skin him alive." "No buts. As a martial artist, don't be so wishy-washy. Chu Qingyan impatiently waved her hand. It settled then. Seeing that the young princess had made up her mind, Turin didn't say anything else. He actually agreed with the young concubine's decision. The young concubine was still too weak now. She was more than enough to deal with ordinary people, but once she encountered a master, she would probably be defeated. So Turin made a gesture to the Xiao Lai's cavalry to stop. The people who were training stopped and didn't know what the cavalry was going to say. Our young Wang Fei is going to join the training in the next few days. You can spar with each other. Turin looked at the people and said seriously. When Turin's words fell, the Xiao Lai's cavalry frowned and looked at each other. The young Wang Fei was resourceful and they admired her intelligence and talent. But if this small body wanted to practice martial arts with them, she would probably be beaten out of the game at any time. Young Wang Fei, this subordinate still feels that the weather is so cold. You should stay in the room. It is not good to catch a cold outside. Big Face urged. Yes, if we accidentally hurt you, the master will hang us up and beat us. The brawny man said with lingering fear. Young Wang Fei, don't make it difficult for us. We still want to walk out of the snow mountain safely. Liu Guang agreed. They didn't want to die at the hands of the master before they met the enemy. That would be too embarrassing. It wasn't that the Xiao Lai's cavalry were too arrogant. It was true that Chu Qingyan couldn't even beat the weakest of them. Even the weakest of them was an elite that could fight 1 against 10 outside. Mu Ling heard the protests and persuasions of her subordinates and stood at the side silently. This was what the young Wang Fei had to face. The 7 people standing in front were the most outstanding of the Xiao Lai's shadow guards. If the young Wang Fei could pass them, then her martial arts would definitely have a qualitative leap. But she had to convince these shadow guards who were usually arrogant to let her join. Before she made this decision, Chu Qingyan was already mentally prepared that these fierce cavalry would not let her join them so easily. Thus, she clasped her hands together, bowed slightly, and spoke clearly and earnestly, I admire the fierce cavalry under His Highness, and I have always wanted to learn and spar with you. Perhaps I am overestimating myself now, but I am still young, and I have time. I am not afraid of hardships. I feel that His Highness is an outstanding hero, and there are no weak soldiers under a strong general. I do not wish to have to hide behind your backs when I encounter enemies in the future. The one that flies beside an eagle is not a sparrow, because it cannot keep up with the speed of an eagle. Thus, I want to become stronger and become someone worthy of standing beside His Highness. I want to fight alongside you, and live and die together. Chu Qingyan's words caused the expressions of the Xiao Lai's cavalry to soften. When they first learned that a little brat had become their master's fiancée, their future mistress, they had felt indignant. How could a little brat be worthy of this status? So when they first saw her, they ignored her and rejected her. But as time passed and their master encountered more and more difficulties, the bravery, courage, intelligence, and strategy she displayed slowly made them look at her in a different light. Imperceptibly, they accepted this young Wang Fei who didn't even reach their chest. But acceptance was acceptance. Her brain wasn't bad, but it didn't mean her body could keep up. They still doubted if such a delicate young Wang Fei could endure the cruelest training of the Xiao Lai's cavalry. Young Wang Fei, are you sure you can endure it? Our training method looks inhumane to the outside. Sweet Potato tried to persuade her. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan's eyes flashed with a strange light. This is great. I was afraid I couldn't improve in a short time. It seems I can. Towards the young Wang Fei who couldn't wait to start, everyone felt helpless. They really couldn't understand this young Wang Fei. Chu Qingyan roughly counted the people standing in the yard. There were about 20-something people. But they seemed to be hesitating about something. She thought and then added, and here, there is no distinction of status. I am not a Wang Fei, and you are not subordinates, so there is no need to be restrained. Do as you wish. Do as you wish? Turin was frightened by her words. Young Wang Fei, you should speak more carefully. Otherwise, if you really do as you wish, Master will hang this subordinate up and beat this subordinate. Chapter 503. Once she made her decision, Chu Qingyan immediately changed her clothes and came back. She was holding the wooden sword that Mu Ling had made for her. It was suitable for her to practice when she had nothing to do. However, when she held it in her hand, she saw the disdainful gazes of the big-faced men. She could not help but frown. Was this sword not good enough? She did not think too much about it and found a place to practice. She first reviewed the Raging Flame sword and then began to practice the Heaven and Earth sword. Just as she was feeling good about herself, a figure suddenly appeared in front of her. It was Cicada. She heard that his swordsmanship was first class. Chu Qingyan thought that he was going to give her some pointers, but she saw a disdainful expression on his face. She frowned slightly and heard him say, "Little princess, do you think it's fun to play with a wooden sword? You don't have any strength at all, let alone go into battle to kill the enemy." Before Chu Qingyan could hear clearly, a black iron sword flew in front of her. She caught it in a hurry. Heavens, her knees almost knelt down. Why was it so heavy? Cicada saw that her knees were bent and her hand that was holding the sword was almost unable to hold it tightly. A trace of disappointment flashed across his eyes. "Little princess consort, your foundation is too weak. You should learn how to use this black iron sword well first." With that, he shook his head and walked away, practicing with his sword. Chu Qingyan found it hard to imagine that she would use this heavy iron sword to practice her swordsmanship. She would not even be able to lift it, right? However, she was not wrong about the contempt in Cicada's eyes. People who practiced martial arts were all arrogant, especially those who were the best in their field. She could understand Cicada's mentality. If he really despised her, he would not have taken the initiative to teach her. He just could not stand her being so weak. Chu Qingyan looked around and the people who were sizing her up immediately retracted their gazes. Later, Chu Qingyan found out from her big face that Cicada's move was to test her. He wanted to see if she could accept their suppression humbly. If this first step went smoothly, they might teach her. However, if it did not work, they would treat her as air and throw her aside. After all, everyone knew how to make bold statements, but those who could truly persevere were few in number. Fortunately, at that time, he did not fly into a rage out of humiliation. Instead, he accepted it humbly. Chu Qingyan clumsily grasped the sword hilt and waved it around. After a few moves, the sword fell to the ground. She heard a chuckle and looked at her hand. Then she looked at the black iron sword lying on the ground. Finally, she clenched her teeth and picked it up. If they wanted to see her make a fool of herself, then she would not let them have their way. If her right hand didn't work, she would switch to her left hand so that she wouldn't rest. The sword moves that he was usually familiar with were now as slow as when he first learned them. But what did that matter? It was just starting all over again. She was not afraid. When all the things that made you feel confident in the past were denied one by one, it was possible to feel depressed, sad, and self-doubt. However, it was very difficult to stand up again. The fierce blade cavalry, who had been paying attention to this side from time to time, saw this scene and slowly retracted their gazes, no longer paying attention. Little princess consort was not that bad. She could still be saved. Chu Qingyan did not know how much time had passed. She kept repeating the sword moves and did not dare to stop. She was afraid that if she stopped, she would not have the strength to pick up the black iron sword again. When Turin stood in front of her, she looked as if she had just been fished out of the water. Her entire body was soaked. This was the first time she had sweated so much in the winter. "Little princess consort, you should rest. There is still training in the afternoon. If you want to give up, you can send someone to inform me." He had seen what little princess consort did this morning, but he did not know how long she could last. The fierce blade cavalry were all very naughty. This was just the beginning. He was worried that little princess consort would not be able to take it. "All right." Chu Qingyan did not have the strength to reply. She leaned against the plum tree and gasped for breath. At this time, Jean Exen walked over and helped his master carry the black iron sword. Jean Exen was the one she had asked Big Ice Cube to let him join the fierce blade cavalry's daily training. Although Jean Exen was young and quiet, he had already integrated into the fierce blade cavalry and his martial arts had improved a lot. "Master, this subordinate wanted to come out and help you, but..." Jean Exen lowered his head, but was pulled back by them. "It's fine. You practice yours and I'll practice mine. We won't interfere with each other. Chu Qingyan waved her hand and did not care at all. However, when she saw Jin Xen easily hold the black iron sword in his hand, a trace of envy appeared in her heart. She also wanted to be like this, holding a precious sword in her hand without any effort. If others could do it, she could do it too. So in the afternoon, Turin saw the diligent figure when he arrived. He was slightly surprised. It wasn't that he looked down on the young princess, but the fierce blade cavalry's training method was not something normal people could accept. Seeing the young princess play with the black iron sword in her hand, he couldn't help but reveal a smile. Since the young princess had this intention, how could he pour cold water on her? He suddenly had a selfish thought as a cunning fox flashed in his eyes. Chu Qingyan did not know that she had fallen into someone's trap. At this moment, she was fully focused on her training. After 2 hours in the morning and afternoon, Chu Qingyan felt that the black iron sword in her hand was not that heavy anymore. Although she could not reach the speed and sharpness of the light sword, she could at least move it freely. She smiled in satisfaction. Originally, she could not bear the weight because she had not practiced for several days and was a bit rusty. Now that she found the feeling, her tolerance slowly increased. This progress made her satisfied. If she put in a bit more effort, she would be able to reach the effect of the light sword. At this time, a provocative voice came from behind her. "Young princess, I heard that your qinggong is not bad. This subordinate also thinks that his qinggong is not bad. How about we have a competition?" Chu Qingyan turned around when she heard the voice. When she saw who it was, her lips couldn't help twitching. It was Flowing Light. Among the fierce blade cavalry, he was an expert in qinggong. He wanted to compete with her? Since the other side had already declared war, how could she not accept? Moreover, she did not want them to look down on her. Also, she wanted to know how strong she was. "How do we compete?" Chu Qingyan directly asked. Flowing Light did not waste words. He pointed at the plum tree several hundred meters away. "From here, use the fastest speed to pick the plum blossoms on the tallest tree and then return. The first person to arrive wins." Chu Qingyan narrowed her eyes and looked over. After confirming the location, she responded, "All right. Young princess, I look forward to your performance. I hope that you will not make this subordinate wait too long at the finish line." Flowing Light said in a mocking voice. "We'll talk about it when you arrive. Start." Chu Qingyan responded in a deep voice. Chapter 504. The competition between Chu Qingyan and Flowing Light attracted a lot of people. Among them, Big Face was the referee, standing in front of the two. He looked at the two and repeated the rules again. Then he paused and was about to shout the order when Flowing Light suddenly said, "I'll give you 10 moves." Chu Qingyan narrowed her eyes. He really looked down on her. But she didn't talk nonsense. The strength of fierce cavalry was not to be underestimated. She pursed her lips and listened seriously. Big Face continued to raise one hand and put it down. "Start." As soon as she finished speaking, Chu Qingyan shot towards the plum tree like an arrow leaving its bough. But when she left the starting position, she heard Flowing Light slowly count, 1, 2. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips and used all her strength, not daring to slack off. She wasn't a tortoise in a race with a Turin. She didn't meet a rabbit that would slack off, and she didn't know how to climb slowly. Among all her skills, she was most satisfied with her qinggong. So far, she hadn't met a match, except for Big Ice and Turin. Just when she was a dozen steps away from the plum tree, she suddenly heard a different sound in the wind. Before she could turn around, she saw a black shadow fly past her. Flowing Light was like his name, as fast as a ray of light. Chu Qingyan stared at him with wide eyes. With a wave of his hand, a plum blossom appeared at his fingertips. Then when he turned around and brushed past her, she heard him say, "Little princess consort, if this subordinate reaches the finish line 10 times and you still haven't arrived, then..." The unfinished words were blatant disdain. Chu Qingyan turned around, but he was already gone. Her face fell. She picked the plum blossom and immediately turned around. When Chu Qingyan returned to the finish line, Flowing Light was leaning against a tree trunk with his arms crossed. He looked at Chu Qingyan with a mocking expression. Little princess consort, this subordinate had already dozed off for a while before you came back. I have to say that you're very weak. I lost. Chu Qingyan didn't try to defend herself. This was the truth. She was indeed not as good as her opponent. It turned out that there was always someone better out there. Previously, he was a frog at the bottom of the well and short-sighted. He thought that what he had was something that others didn't have. He didn't expect that what he had was the cheapest. Your reaction was too slow. By the time the enemy attacked, you had already become a ghost under the blade. If you don't have enough stamina and your legs can't keep up, your speed will only get slower and slower. There's one more thing. Qinggong is not only for escaping in times of danger, but also for chasing after the enemy. You didn't use your full strength just now, because you don't have the sense of danger of death. Flowing Light retracted the sneer at the corner of his mouth and criticized with a serious expression, emphasizing each and every word. Chu Qingyan's face turned pale. This was the first time that someone had pointed out her shortcomings so directly. Even Turin, who was strict with her, had never spoken to her in such a tone. The impact on her heart was even more intense. Turin looked on from the side with a worried expression. He didn't know if the young princess could accept these criticisms. In the past, when he took care of the young princess himself, he had never thought of training her like Xiao Lai Qi because their duty was to protect the master and the young princess. They didn't need the young princess to go into battle to kill the enemy. In addition, he felt that the young princess was delicate and soft. If she couldn't withstand such a difficult training, he would be more relaxed with her. However, the thorns under his command were not so easy to talk to. They were very strict. Once they entered the camp, regardless of whether they were male or female, they would treat them like men and wouldn't have so many concerns. Therefore, whether the young princess could withstand it or not depended on herself. "Okay, Flowing Light, can you teach me?" Since he was willing to spend time pointing out her shortcomings, then he should be willing to take care of her. Chu Qingyan had never doubted her own judgment. Flowing Light wanted to continue speaking, but when he heard her words, he was slightly stunned. He really wanted to teach the young princess himself. "Okay, tomorrow morning, this subordinate will wait for you here." After speaking, Flowing Light turned and left, not giving her any chance to regret. Chu Qingyan was stunned. Morning? 3 to 5 in the morning? So early? But she had already spoken, so there was no room for regret. At this time, Cicada walked over and said to Chu Qingyan impolitely, "Young princess, tomorrow morning, this subordinate will check if your swordsmanship has improved. If there is no improvement, then, another person who didn't speak clearly." Chu Qingyan was speechless. Without saying anything, she took the black iron sword from Jean Xian's hand and continued to practice her swordsmanship. Did these people not want to give her time to rest? It was like forcing a duck to a perch. Chu Qingyan wanted to cry but had no tears, but she didn't relax the swordsmanship in her hand. When Turin, who was standing at the side, saw this scene, he was both gratified and ashamed. He was gratified that the young princess didn't disappoint. He was ashamed of those troublemakers under his command. Most likely, they didn't really want to teach the young princess. The most important thing was that they wanted to experience the feeling of teaching others. In addition, their master had been harsh on their training, so they also wanted the young princess to experience this feeling. But if the young princess could learn something from them, then she would benefit immensely. When the sun was about to set, Chu Qingyan finished a day of practice. At this time, she was about to collapse. If Xining hadn't come to find her, she was afraid that she would have collapsed on the ground. "Master, why do you have to suffer like this?" Looking at the bloody blisters on her master's hands, Xining was so distressed that tears almost fell down. She didn't know why her master had to work so hard to learn martial arts. With Xining's support, Chu Qingyan finally dared to let out a sigh of relief and let half of her strength fall onto Xining's shoulder. "Xining, there are many things that you can't ask why. Just like there are many things that you have to do." Chu Qingyan's gaze went past Xining and looked at the sun that was about to set. With great effort, she revealed a smile. "The sun rises in the east and sets in the west. It doesn't matter if it's cold or hot. It doesn't change the 4 seasons. It has its own mission. And I want to do something that I feel is right. She didn't want to watch the people she cared about fall while she couldn't do anything about it. She didn't want to be a burden to others. She only wanted to be able to defend herself and protect others at the same time. She wanted to be a person who stood by his side without fear of any danger. She had always wanted it, and it was a must. Xining didn't understand her words, but she could feel her determination. Knowing that she couldn't persuade her, she couldn't help but cry, "Then master, you must protect yourself well. Don't get hurt. Xining will be sad." Chu Qingyan smiled faintly. "I'm starving to death. Hurry and help me back to wash up and eat." Xining immediately helped her back. But when they entered the courtyard, Chu Qingyan saw a familiar figure standing in the corridor. Big ice cube, she hurriedly hid her hands behind her back. Chapter 505. Xiao Su saw her at a glance and saw her deceiving action. He frowned and looked a bit gloomy. "Where have you been all day?" She had disappeared after breakfast this morning. She said that she would have lunch in her room, and then he couldn't see her in the afternoon. Seeing her listless appearance now, he faintly felt a touch of displeasure in his heart. Chu Qingyan heard his voice and knew that he was unhappy. She thought to herself, "Oh no." When she went to find Turin to join the practice today, she decided on the spot and didn't have time to tell Big Ice Block. He must be worried when he didn't see her for the whole day. Cough. Chu Qingyan immediately stood still. Even if she practiced until her legs went soft, she didn't dare to show the slightest tremble. "Why are you standing so far away? Come here." Xiao Su frowned even more. He wasn't a tiger. Was she afraid that he would eat her? Chu Qingyan sighed. It seemed that Big Ice Block wanted to teach her a lesson. Since it was a knife to her head and a knife to her head, she might as well face the storm directly. Thus, Chu Qingyan walked over with the attitude of a warrior who was ready to face death with no fear. Xiao Su was a bit angry at first, but seeing her like this, his anger dissipated and he only found it funny. "Where have you been? Tell me the truth and I'll be lenient. Resist and I'll be strict." When the little fellow stood in front of him, Xiao Su said indifferently. Chu Qingyan thought that Big Ice Block was really good at copying her words. But as for where she went today, even if she didn't say it now, Big Ice Block would know sooner or later, so she decided to tell him the truth. "I went to train with Turin and the others." She lowered her head and didn't dare to look at him. She knew that Big Ice Block liked her to practice martial arts, but she didn't dare to let him see the scars on her hands. Xiao Su couldn't help being surprised when he heard this. He looked down at the person standing in front of him. Although she hid her hands well, he could still see the red little hands from his high angle. "Stretch out your hand." His tone was still emotionless. Chu Qingyan was stunned. She raised her head and saw that he was looking at her calmly. She hesitated for a moment and finally pulled her hands out from behind her back under his gaze. Xiao Su's pupils constricted when he saw the large and small blisters on her soft and delicate hands. He was absent-minded for a moment, but he quickly regained his composure. He ordered Xining, "Prepare the medicine and silver needles." It had been a long time since she had seen His Highness so cold. Xining hurriedly responded and ran to Qingyan Luo's room. Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. "Xining was frightened by you." "Really? Since you're still in the mood to fight for justice for others, it proves that you're quite energetic. Come in." After Xiao Su gave the order, he turned around and entered the door. Chu Qingyan blinked. The Big Ice Cube didn't get angry, didn't scold her, and didn't lecture her. It was really strange. She immediately followed him. "Sit." Xiao Su pointed at the chair in front of him, then reached out his hand to her. Chu Qingyan's actions were as follows. She came in when he asked her to, and sat down when he asked her to. But what the hell was he doing by reaching out his hand? She was a little confused, but when she met the Big Ice Cube's impatient gaze, she casually put her little hand on his hand. She didn't know if she had guessed correctly. Xiao Su looked at the two little hands holding his hand and couldn't help but twitch the corners of his eyes. He flipped her hand over and placed it on top of his palm. With this flip, her red and swollen hand was completely exposed to his eyes. "Big Ice Cube, don't look. It'll be fine in a few days." His gaze lingered on her hand for a long time, making her a little uncomfortable. She wanted to reach her hand back. But the other party's hand only held hers gently, and she couldn't break free. "Stop it." He frowned. As soon as he finished speaking, Chu Qingyan became obedient. It was over. The big ice cube had returned to his previous state of being a man of few words. He said one word or two, and it wasn't cute at all. While Chu Qingyan was letting her imagination run wild, Xiao Su frowned. It was impossible for her to have a good time in a few days. It wasn't as if he didn't know the people under him. They had been hiding sullenly recently, and those who had always been unyielding had a lot of resentment in their hearts. They were all trying their best to do something, and the little fellow had bumped into the muzzle of the gun. It was impossible for her to have a peaceful time in the next few days. This was only a small injury, and it wouldn't be so light in the future. Just as the two of them were lost in their own thoughts, Xining huffed and puffed as she ran back with medicine in her arms. Xiao Su took the silver needle, grabbed her hand with one hand, and held the needle with the other, ready to insert it into her hand. Chu Qingyan looked at the sharp silver needle tip and broke out in a cold sweat. Big ice cube, what are you doing?" "Picking the blood blisters." Xiao Su didn't even look at her, and directly started. "Bear with it." As soon as he finished speaking, she was already screaming. "Ouch, ouch, ouch." The louder she screamed, the faster Xiao Su moved. More than a dozen blisters were popped by him, and then he quickly picked up the medicine next to him and sprinkled it on her hand. Under a clear light, the pain was alleviated a lot. Chu Qingyan blinked her teary eyes, and looked at him neatly helping her to bandage her wound. She felt even more wronged in her heart. "It hurts so much." Chu Qingyan groaned. "You'll be in pain in the future." Xiao Su continued what he was doing seriously, and told her the truth without even looking up. When Chu Qingyan heard this, she was instantly discouraged. However, she quickly regained her composure. "I know, but I won't give up. And remember what you said." Xiao Su withdrew his hand and looked at her with eyes as calm as water. He didn't ask her why she suddenly wanted to join the training, didn't ask her what she practiced today, and didn't ask her if she was wronged. Because once a person made a decision, they had to be responsible for their own decision, and the words of others didn't matter. Chu Qingyan thought that after the wound was bandaged, the big ice cube would start lecturing her, but he didn't. This made her feel a bit uneasy. The big ice cube was very strange. Shouldn't he be lecturing her, telling her not to make decisions without permission? And when the two of them were looking at each other without saying anything, a discordant sound rang out. "Goo goo, what's that sound?" Xiao Su frowned. Chu Qingyan's face turned red, and she pointed at her stomach. "It's hungry." Xiao Su looked at her deeply and then turned to Xining. "Pass the food." "Yes." Xining felt her highness' cold aura, and ran faster than a rabbit. At this time, Chu Qingyan was waiting for the food to be served, full of satisfaction. She was about to faint from hunger. But when she saw her two hooved hands, which were as round as a robot cat's, and couldn't even hold chopsticks, she wanted to cry. She saw the person sitting quietly next to her and immediately went over. "I can't eat with the big ice cube. Feed me, feed me, feed me." Saying it once is enough. Xiao Su's tone was helpless. "Because important things have to be said 3 times. She said righteously. Chapter 506. After contentedly enjoying Big Ice Cube service, Chu Qingyan patted her round belly, revealing a kitten-like contentment. "What time are you getting up tomorrow morning?" Xiao Su looked at her squinting contentedly, and his heart softened. "Tomorrow morning?" Chu Qingyan woke up with a start, and quickly extricated herself from the comfort. 5 in the morning. She drooped her little head weakly. God, she could only sleep for 4 hours, which was 4 hours in modern time. What a tragedy! At least they were tactful and did not dare to be too cruel to the little one. When he trained them, they had to get up at 3 in the morning to prepare. "Big Ice Cube, I'm going back to my room. I have to get up early tomorrow, so you should sleep early." Once she was full, her whole body slacked. Once she slacked off, her whole body felt tired. Chu Qingyan could not wait to lie down and sleep. Seeing Chu Qingyan's somewhat unstable footsteps, Xiao Su's eyes darkened, and he suddenly said, "Come out." Turin appeared immediately. He waited for the little princess to leave before calling him out. He was afraid that Shaolai cavalry would be in trouble. Turin lowered his head and stood respectfully. "Who changed Qingyan's sword?" He went straight to the point. "Cicada." Turin's scalp tightened as he replied. "You're quite brave. In that case, in the next 3 days, add 10 pounds of weight." Xiao Su's expression was indifferent. Turin immediately responded. "Who made the appointment at 5 in the morning?" Xiao Su continued to ask. "Lu Guang. He said he was going to teach the little princess Qinggong." Turin's scalp tightened even more. "I see. He's quite free. Let him go to the opposite mountain tomorrow at 1 in the morning to catch a few wild animals for everyone to eat." Xiao Su's tone was still calm, as if he was just giving a few unimportant orders. When Turin heard this, he felt deep sympathy for Lu Guang. Ever since Shaolai had undergone 3 years of hellish training, he had never gotten up so early to train again. It seemed that these people had really stepped on his master's bottom line, but his master didn't get angry in front of them. Instead, he punished them. This meant that he supported their training. However, he would definitely get back at the little princess for what she had suffered. Turin suddenly felt that his master was very scary. In the future, he had to listen to Hualing's advice and stay away from Father Chu and the young princess. Only then could he live a peaceful life. After returning to the room to wash up, Chu Qingyan fell onto the bed and fell into a deep sleep. Master, wake up." Xining rubbed her eyes and went into the master's room to wake her up. Chu Qingyan replied in a daze, "Let me sleep a little longer, just a little longer. Master, don't you want to practice?" Xining called out again. Last night, her master had specifically told her to wake her up in the morning no matter what. If she really couldn't wake her up, then she could use a basin of cold water to wake her up. Just as Xining was hesitating whether or not she should really go get cold water, Chu Qingyan heard the 2 words, "practice," and immediately jumped up from the bed. However, this heroic posture didn't last long because her feet were in too much pain and she fell back into the blankets. "What time is it now?" Chu Qingyan felt as if her entire body had been dismantled and reassembled. She couldn't even lift her hands. She rubbed her temples and asked in a daze, "It's already 5 o'clock in the morning." Xining immediately replied, Hurry, give me my clothes. I'm going to be late." At this time, Chu Qingyan couldn't care less about the pain in her body. She immediately got up and hurriedly put on her clothes. Then she put on her shoes and hurriedly washed up. With one hand, she picked up the porridge and drank it in one gulp without caring if it was hot or not. With the other hand, she grabbed the steamed bun on the table and ran far away. Xining just put down the towel and turned her head to find that her master's figure had disappeared. She sighed and said, "Master seems to have flown away. It must be because I'm still not awake. I'll go back and sleep again." At this time, Chu Qingyan was already on her way to the training courtyard. After Chu Qingyan left, a figure stood in the corridor and looked in the direction she left with a deep gaze. On such a cold day, the little fellow rarely woke up so early. Later, he would ask someone to boil some ginger soup to prevent her from catching a cold. When Chu Qingyan swallowed the last mouthful of steamed bun, she had already arrived at the courtyard. The sky was dark and there wasn't a trace of light. Fortunately, there were lanterns in the courtyard, so it wasn't so dark that she couldn't see her fingers. The courtyard was very quiet. Chu Qingyan looked around. Why didn't she see anyone? At this time, a resentful voice sounded from the tree beside her, "Little princess, you're late." Hearing this, Chu Qingyan was shocked. She took 2 steps back and looked up. She saw Lu Guang half lying on the tree branch with a sleepy and resentful face. Then he flipped over and landed on the ground. He was very disdainful of her own fear. "Didn't you sleep well last night?" As a master, Chu Qingyan felt that it was necessary to empathize with her subordinate. These words made Lu Guang's face darken. Didn't he not sleep well at all? Did he not sleep well last night? When he returned from his mission last night, he received orders from Sir Turin that his master wanted him to come out and practice at 1 in the morning. He didn't even have time to change his clothes before he went to climb a few mountains. Now, his legs were still weak. Your subordinate slept very well, Lu Guang replied with gritted teeth. Chu Qingyan felt that she didn't offend him in any way. Why did it feel like she owed him millions of dollars? All right, little princess, come down with me. No matter what, he was a man and couldn't be calculative with a woman. Moreover, the other party was his master. Lu Guang felt that he had to accept his fate when he met a male master who was protective of his own people. Seeing that Lu Guang had returned to his usual serious appearance, Chu Qingyan nodded in agreement. She knew that her training was about to begin. The two used their qinggong, rising and falling, and finally stopped at the foot of a mountain. Chu Qingyan raised her head and looked at the snowy mountain peak. She was puzzled. What are we doing? Climbing to the top of the mountain. Lu Guang looked at the top of the mountain and said, Remember, you only have 4 hours. Otherwise, there will be punishment. Chu Qingyan took a deep breath. She stared at the towering mountain peak in front of her. It was rugged and grotesque. In some places, there were only protruding rocks. There was no foothold at all. How could she climb? What was worse was that it was snowing. Snowflakes floated down one by one, landing on people's faces. It was a little cold, but at this moment, Chu Qingyan's heart was even colder. Lu Guang observed her expression. It's not too late if you give up now. Chu Qingyan took a deep breath and said in a determined tone, I won't give up. Even if I fall, I won't. With that, she reached out and untied the white gauze wrapped around her fingers. She had to admit that Yen Luo's medicine was very effective. The blisters had already started to heal, but unfortunately, her hands would have new scars today. Do you have any tools that I can use? Chu Qingyan put down her hands, analyzed the situation, and then asked. Hearing this, Lu Guang threw her a dagger. Chu Qingyan took the dagger, gripped it between her teeth, and took the first step. Chapter 507. As soon as Chu Qingyan stepped on the first rock, her feet slipped. Because of the weather, after the snow, the rocks were cold and smooth, making it difficult to climb. However, she did not give up. Instead, she carefully stepped on the rock with the tip of her foot and shifted her center of gravity forward. Then she grabbed a vine with both hands. As soon as she grabbed it, she felt a piercing pain in the places where she had been injured yesterday. Chu Qingyan did not let go. Instead, she leaped up and grabbed onto another protruding rock. Then she placed her feet on a spot where she could land. Following that, she leaped up and grabbed onto the 2 protruding rocks. Her entire body was like a gecko stuck to the stone wall, her body firmly stuck to it. This mountain was too steep. There were too few things she could rely on. Moreover, the sky was too dark. If it were not for the reflection of the white snow on the mountain, she would not have been able to see the road clearly. And it was because of this distraction that the rock she grabbed in her right hand loosened. She almost fell down. Fortunately, she reacted quickly and stabbed a dagger into the crevice of the rock to avoid the danger of falling. At this time, Lu Guang, who was following behind her, easily passed by her. Seeing that she was sweating profusely, he couldn't help but shake his head. Too slow, too slow. How can you reach the top of the mountain in 4 hours like this? Chu Qingyan was speechless. It was her first time climbing a mountain in this way, okay? Do you know that in modern times, you have to wear a safety belt when climbing a mountain? She really wanted to complain. However, when she saw Flowing Light's body as light as a swallow effortlessly stepping on the mountain rocks and jumping far away, she shut her mouth. Only when one had absolute strength could one speak. Otherwise, others would only think that one was looking for an excuse and would not pay attention to one at all. Chu Qingyan calmed down. Now, she did not care about the time. As long as she could completely climb this mountain today, it would be a victory. Flowing Light sat on a pine tree on the cliff, leisurely watching the people below struggling with the mountain rocks. He seemed to feel that she was not as anxious as before. Instead, she slowly walked forward step by step. The contempt in Cicada's eyes faded a lot. He had to admit that the little princess had a good mentality. Chu Qingyan felt that it was not a good idea to climb the mountain with only a knife. Cicada said that he wanted to teach her lightness skill, so it would not be as simple as climbing the mountain. She closed her eyes and recalled his actions when the flowing light passed by her. Yes, Qinggong. She opened her eyes and clenched the dagger with her teeth again. Then, she narrowed her eyes and looked up. When she saw a protruding rock, she used her inner force and with a light kick, she flew up. Then, she grabbed the rock with both hands and stepped on the sunken ground. The first experiment was a success. Chu Qingyan continued with the second experiment. After going back and forth a few times, Chu Qingyan let go of her courage and increased her speed. She was like a dancing butterfly, but she only dared to fly a short distance each time. She was afraid that she would lose her balance and fall. At this moment, she still couldn't fly up with just her 2 feet like Flowing Light. She still needed to borrow an assistant. Flowing Light slept on the pine tree for a while. Then he heard a rustling sound. He couldn't help but open his eyes and look down. He saw a beautiful figure leaping up continuously. Surprise flashed in his eyes. So fast? She was still below just now, but now she was almost halfway up the mountain. He sat up straight and watched the little princess approach bit by bit. He keenly found that the method she used was very similar to his. He was instantly surprised. He had been secretly learned by the little princess. Although there was still a gap between them, it was the first time he had seen someone successfully imitate him just by observing. Moreover, it was someone he looked down on. This shock made him widen his eyes. Chu Qingyan had just reached halfway up the mountain when she saw Flowing Light staring at her with 2 dead fish eyes. She couldn't help but laugh. However, she didn't have time to chat with him. She passed by him and went straight up. Cicada looked at her figure and followed her. When you jump, inhale and pull in your abdomen. Gather your internal strength at the tips of your feet. Then, find a place where you can land. When you step on it, don't relax. Take a breath when you are in the air. Try to keep your body balanced. Bend your waist slightly and don't stiffen your body. Flowing Light matched her pace and then said in her ear. Hearing this, Chu Qingyan knew that he was teaching her. She immediately followed his steps. Sure enough, her body was much lighter. She didn't have to spend as much effort as before. Her steps were also much faster. However, the further she went, the faster her physical strength was consumed. She was a little exhausted. However, when she saw Flowing Light beside her, who was as light as a swallow and had a ruddy complexion, he was completely different from her panting and sweating. Chu Qingyan suddenly felt infuriated when she compared herself to others. Little princess, look at your feet. Flowing Light suddenly said. Only then did Chu Qingyan realize that she had almost lost her life because of this distraction. She steadied her feet and then continued to go up, no longer letting her imagination run wild. The top of the mountain was just a foot away. Chu Qingyan felt relieved. Suddenly, her feet slipped and she leaned back. She wanted to use her internal energy to stabilize her body, but she realized that she had no strength. She suddenly felt a little desperate. She was so close. What a pity. Also, it was even more of a pity to die young. Suddenly, she realized that her body was suspended in the air. She didn't fall down. She looked up and saw Flowing Light grabbing her collar. Then, without saying anything, he quickly flipped to the top of the mountain. When Chu Qingyan fell onto the snowy ground, she felt that her entire body didn't belong to her because her soul had been scared away. Although you didn't finish it in 4 hours, the effect is still not bad. Flowing Light gave a pertinent comment. Chu Qingyan looked up at the sky. At this moment, the snowflakes rustled down and stuck to her face and lips, bringing some coldness. But now, she still had lingering fears. Get up and take a look. Take a look at the snow mountain that you spent so much effort to climb up. Flowing Light stood at the top of the mountain and turned around to wave at her. Chu Qingyan thought that it was true. It wasn't easy to come up here, so she should take a look. Later, she realized that this was the first time, but it wouldn't be the last. The moment she got up, the first ray of sunlight pierced through the clouds and shone on the ground. Sunrise, when the light shone, it quickly spread out. She saw the rolling sea of clouds, the endless snow mountain, and beautiful birds. Attracted by the magnificent scenery in front of her, Chu Qingyan couldn't help but smile. So beautiful. Before she finished admiring, flowing light spoiled the scenery and said, "It's time to go." "Go where?" Chu Qingyan asked blankly. "Down the mountain." Flowing light looked at her disdainfully. Could it be that climbing the mountain once made her stupid? What the hell? Down the mountain? Chu Qingyan lowered her head and looked down. She could only see clouds surrounding the mountain. She couldn't see the bottom of the mountain. How high is this? I'm going to die. Chapter 508. When she returned to the foot of the mountain, Chu Qingyan felt as if she had crossed the bridge of helplessness. The hardships involved were indescribable to outsiders. She dragged her exhausted body and walked towards the courtyard step by step. Beside her, Lu Guang, who was refreshed, said excitedly in her ear, "Young princess consort, this subordinate found that your learning ability is very good. Come again tomorrow morning. Perhaps you can reach the top of the mountain in 4 hours." Compared to Flowing Light's enthusiasm, Chu Qingyan really wanted to turn a blind eye to him. Now that she thought about the horror of going down the mountain, she reckoned that it would give her several nightmares. What she wanted to do now was to go back to her room and have a good sleep. Then, she would ask Xining to make her some medicinal soup to suppress her shock. Wait, tomorrow morning? Chu Qingyan's body stiffened. That's right. From now until we leave the snow mountain, this subordinate will be your Qinggong instructor. Flowing Light smiled at her proudly. Chu Qingyan felt that the whole world had darkened. But this was not the only thing waiting for her. She had just returned to the courtyard when she was surrounded by people. "Young princess consort, I heard that your fist technique is not bad. Why don't we compare notes?" Qinghua greeted her and said to her with a smile, "Fist technique is not bad? Where did you hear that? Tell me quickly, I want to hear it too." Chu Qingyan rolled her eyes. "If you want to find an excuse to embarrass me, just say it. Why do you have to use this opening line? Come on." Chu Qingyan did not waste time and said directly. Qinghua was overjoyed when she agreed, but he deliberately suppressed his joy. Then he deliberately said, "Many thanks for young princess consort's teaching. Then this subordinate will not be polite." It was not teaching, but when the time came, he would be gentle and not hurt her face. Otherwise, when the big ice cube saw it, he would be angry. The crowd quickly cleared out a space for the two of them and surrounded them in the middle. Some of them had already prepared food and were ready to eat while watching the show. Chu Qingyan sighed when she saw that everyone had come prepared. Just how much did they dislike her? Everyone wanted to see her embarrass herself. However, she had already lost face. If she lost face a few more times, other than being thick-skinned, nothing else mattered. Qinghua said, "Little princess consort, you are a woman. This subordinate will let you have 3 punches, plus the right hand and both feet." This meant that she would only use her left hand to deal with her. Chu Qingyan sighed again. Everyone gave in to her at the beginning. Was it because they wanted to be satisfied when the tables turned? However, she felt that even if he went easy on her, she might not be able to take more than 10 punches from him. Chu Qingyan swallowed her saliva and encouraged herself. No matter what the outcome was, she had to do her best. She steadied herself and clenched her fists. She took a step forward and quickly punched him. He easily dodged the first punch. He dodged the second punch and she missed. He did not dodge the third punch, but she hit his chest, as if she was tickling him. Chu Qingyan stared blankly at her own hands and heard him say, "Little princess consort, it's this subordinate's turn to make a move. Sorry for the offense." His left hand grabbed her wrist, which she did not have time to withdraw, and then he exerted force. Her entire body flew into the air and was thrown to the ground by him. Her entire body landed heavily on the ground, and Chu Qingyan felt as if her organs had been displaced. Luckily, her clothes were thick enough to reduce the force of the impact. However, Chu Qingyan still felt as if her bones had been shattered. "Little princess consort, you have lost." Qinghua laughed foolishly and then waved at his brothers, as if he had won some great award. Chu Qingyan wanted to cry but had no tears. Was bullying a little girl worth being happy about? However, what Chu Qingyan did not know was that Qinghua was not happy about winning against her, but what would happen after winning. Since Cicada's training time is set at 3 in the morning, then this subordinate will set it at this time tomorrow. Little princess consort, don't forget the time. Qinghua will start teaching you many sets of fist techniques. Qinghua was so happy that he was jumping up and down. It was hard to imagine that the usually strict and realistic Xiao Lai-Chi would show such a childish expression. No, she seemed to be focusing on the wrong thing. Hey, she did not say that she would recognize the loser as her teacher. But just as she stood up, she was stopped by another person. It was Big Face. Little princess consort, this one is not talented, but I also want to ask you for advice on archery. Big Face held a military longbow in his hand, his face full of righteousness. Righteous and righteous? It did not match his current words and actions, okay? Do you also want to be my teacher? Chu Qingyan finally could not help but ask. Big Face looked surprised. Little princess consort, you're thinking too much. Chu Qingyan was relieved when she heard this. It was good that he was not. If there were 3 teachers, she would not be able to handle it. But, no matter what, after little princess consort lost to this subordinate, she felt that her skills were not as good as others, so she turned to this subordinate and asked for advice. Then, this subordinate reluctantly agreed. Big Face still had a righteous look on his face. Chu Qingyan really wanted to spray them to death with a mouthful of salt soda. Was it really good to speak such righteous nonsense? The result was self-evident. Chu Qingyan lost. Others could shoot a willow leaf from 100 paces away, and none of their shots missed the target, but 8 out of 10 of her shots missed the target. Then, a certain person who said that he reluctantly agreed quickly made a decision for himself to the crowd. Little princess consort wants me to be her archery teacher. Then there was a burst of warm applause. Chu Qingyan held the longbow and stood there in a daze. She did not agree to anything just now. She was speechless the whole time. Where did you get the idea that I agreed? Tell me, I promise I won't beat you to death. After going through Big Face and Green Gourd, Chu Qingyan was already in despair. They were taking her as a disciple in disguise. But she quickly sorted out her emotions and calmly looked at the people in front of her who were eyeing her covetously. She said without fear of death, "Who else is there? Bring it on." The rest of the people rubbed their fists and couldn't wait, but they did not forget to be polite on the surface. Little princess consort, sorry for the offense. Little princess consort, please give me advice. Little princess consort, you lost. Thus, in one morning she was forced to take in several teachers. Chu Qingyan looked at their wild joy after they succeeded in taking her as a disciple and felt that the world had gone mad. But after the shock and helplessness, she looked forward to the upcoming training. Since they took such pains to teach her, how could she easily let go of such a good opportunity? When heaven is about to bestow a great responsibility on a person, it must first torment his will, work his muscles and bones, starve his skin and starve him, empty his body, and disturb his actions. Only then can he be patient and gain what he can't. She can definitely do it. At this time, the few teachers who succeeded in taking her as a disciple gathered together and whispered, "I don't know what punishment Master will give us tonight. Let's be more careful first," Big Face said. "To be able to guide the future mistress, this punishment is nothing." Cicada stroked his leg. It was still sore. "That's right." Lu Guang and the others nodded in agreement. Chapter 509. Of course, Chu Qingyan did not know that these fierce cavalry, who were usually strict and serious, would have such a black-bellied side to them. At this moment, she dragged her tired body and slowly walked towards her own courtyard. She could already foresee what kind of demonic training she would face from tomorrow onwards. Today, she had already lost half of her life. She didn't know if the remaining half of her life would be enough for them to torment her. Horsemanship, archery, fist techniques, swordsmanship, qinggong. She had finally seen the 18 different kinds of martial arts. But when it came to herself, it was a little scary. But she couldn't help but imagine, if she really learned all of them, how awesome would she be when she walked out. No. The main thing was whether her small body could bear all of these. After all, one couldn't become a fatty in one bite. At that thought, Chu Qingyan shook her head. trying to get rid of those weird thoughts. The most important thing for her now was to take a hot bath and have a good night's sleep. Tomorrow was going to be another tough day. When Chu Qingyan returned to her courtyard, she saw the person sitting in the courtyard. She slowly walked over and weakly greeted, "Big Ice Cube, aren't you going to eat? It's already time to eat." Xiao Su was sitting here, waiting for her to come back. When he saw her dragging her feet, with a pale face, a complicated emotion flashed through his eyes. He waved his hand at her, "Come and sit." Chu Qingyan originally wanted to return to her room, but when she heard his words, she walked over. "Give me your hand." Xiao Su's gaze fell from her face to her hands. The white gauze that he had bandaged her last night had already disappeared and there were more than 10 abrasions on her wounds. At this moment, her brain had already turned into paste. Whatever he said was the truth. When that pair of scarred little hands laid in his palm, Xiao Su's heart couldn't help but tremble. Following that, he lowered his head and seriously cleaned the fine gravel from her wounds. Then he took the medicine prepared on the stone table and slowly sprinkled it on her wounds. Numb, piercing pain. The 10 fingers were linked to the heart. "It hurts." The person who was about to fall asleep suddenly opened her eyes and cried out. "Bear with it a little longer." Xiao Su took her other hand and repeated the same action. His eyes were filled with complicated emotions. Chu Qingyan had already regained consciousness. She lowered her head, and the first thing she saw was the person gently tending to her wounds. "Big Ice Cube, although I was tortured badly by your subordinates on the training grounds, once I'm back, I will be taken care of by their big boss. At least I found my balance." Chu Qingyan's tone was relaxed. She was trying to find joy in her misery as she consoled herself. Xiao Su glanced at her. "If you can't stand it, you can stop it at any time." Chu Qingyan immediately shook her head. "I've already taken the first step. How can I take it back so easily?" He knew that she wouldn't give up. Logically, he hoped that she could persevere, but his heart still ached. Xiao Su didn't say anything more. Instead, he pointed at her leg. "Where are you hurt?" Just now, when he saw her limping over, he guessed that she must be injured. Chu Qingyan lowered her head in confusion. Her leg was injured? Why didn't she know? Seeing that she didn't respond, Xiao Su reached out and placed her leg on his knee. He was about to pull up her pants. At this moment, the skin of her ankle came into contact with the cold air. She shivered and her rationality came back. She hurriedly reached out and grabbed his wrist. Her eyes were filled with embarrassment and pleading. "Big Ice Cube, not here. There's someone here." Xiao Su frowned. "What's the problem here?" Chu Qingyan's face turned even redder. She was angry and embarrassed. "Because I'm a girl. A girl. Xiao Su frowned again. "I know you're a girl. You don't have to keep emphasizing it." Chu Qingyan felt that she had really lost to him. She simply grabbed his wrist tightly and didn't want to let go. As soon as he said that, he realized in hindsight that the little one was shy. "We're all like this in the military camp," he explained with a low cough. "I'm not a boy." Chu Qingyan harumphed. Xiao Su felt that he couldn't win an argument against her this time. He stood up. When Chu Qingyan didn't understand what was going on, he reached out and carried her by the waist. "Then I'll go back to the room and apply medicine for you." With that, Xiao Su turned and left. It had been a long time since she was in the Big Ice Cube's arms. But at this moment, she was extremely tired. Her reflexes were long and she was slow. She didn't have time to think about anything. She followed her heart and reached out to hug his neck. Then she leaned against his chest and closed her eyes in a daze. When he returned to the room and placed her on the bed, she was already asleep. Xiao Su saw that her face was full of fatigue. He couldn't bear to wake her up. He sat down by her bed and placed her legs flat. Then he pulled up her pants. What entered his eyes were crisscrossing bloody scars. Some were scrapes, some were cut by sharp objects, some were bruises, and some were red and swollen. Because her skin was white, these scars were even more obvious and even more terrifying. Since he was young, he had suffered all kinds of injuries. With one look, he could guess where these injuries came from. That long and thin wound was when she was climbing. She was scratched by a protruding pebble. That large patch of red was when she didn't hold on tight and slipped. Her legs were scraped by a rock. That large bruise was when she fell to the ground. Xiao Su narrowed his eyes. There was a strange emotion in his eyes. His pupils moved. In the end, he could only let out a long sigh. He picked up the medicine and applied it for her. He was serious and meticulous. No one would have thought that a person who was used to using weapons to take people's lives would have such a tender moment. These medicines were all top-notch. After using them today, she would be mostly healed by tomorrow. However, there would be new scars on her body the next day. Practicing martial arts was like this. If there were no injuries, there would be no progress. He had walked this path and never felt any pain. But when he saw the scars on the little fellow's body, his heart didn't feel good. The person under his hand seemed to feel the pain. She couldn't help but sob. A sleeping person was the most defenseless. At the same time, what was revealed was the truest feeling. Tears faintly streamed down the corner of her tightly shut eyes. He couldn't help but stretch out his finger to wipe the corner of her eyes. His fingertips were moist and warm. Xiao Su's hand paused. He couldn't help but think of the person who gritted her teeth and endured the pain. She even pretended to be fine and chatted with him. The softest part of his heart was gently hit by her. At this time, the person lying on the bed turned over. She stopped crying and slightly opened her mouth. "I won't admit defeat. I won't," she muttered to herself with determination. It was as if she was convincing others, but also as if she was convincing herself. Xiao Su's hand caressed her cheek. His lips slightly curved into a tender smile. "Little fellow, I know. You won't lose. You have always been making people sit up and take notice of you." Chapter 5:10. In the middle of the night, Chu Qingyan was awakened by hunger. She got up in pain and patted her head, only to find that she was not in her room. The candles were still burning in the room. She turned her head and saw the person leaning against the back of the chair, sleeping with one hand on his forehead. She blinked her eyes, and after confirming that this was not a dream, she seriously looked at the person in front of her. The person with his eyes closed had long and thick eyelashes that gently trembled, like the wings of a butterfly, elegant and beautiful. She envied people with long eyelashes, because it made their eyes look especially big and deep. Just like the person in front of her, when he opened his eyes, the color of ink made people want to sink into his deep mystery. Wait, why did she have this kind of feeling? No, when did the person in front of her wake up? Big Ice Cube. She immediately stopped looking at him and tactfully and sincerely said, "Big Ice Cube, I don't think I have eaten tonight." Hearing her hint, Xiao Su's eyes flashed with a smile, and then he got up and walked out the door. Chu Qingyan leaned against the wall of the bed and watched as he opened the door. He seemed to be saying something to someone outside. She scanned her surroundings and realized that this was Big Ice's room. How did she end up in his room? Before falling asleep, she seemed to have been carried by Big Ice Cube, and then she did not have any memory of where they went. She moved her hands and feet, and it seemed that medicine had been applied. The swelling on her legs had dissipated a lot, but she was still a little embarrassed. Although in the modern era, when they wore short pants and short skirts, they did not feel anything, but in the ancient era, when in Rome, do as the Romans do. Having her legs seen by someone, it seemed a little embarrassing. But she comforted herself, this person was Big Ice Cube, not someone else, not someone else, not someone else. She comforted herself in her heart. And at this time, Xiao Su had already walked back, and behind him was Xining, and Xining was holding hot food in her hands. Xining placed the food on the table, then smiled at her mistress who was about to drool. His Highness asked this servant to prepare the food and put it in the kitchen, so that you can eat it whenever you wake up. Chu Qingyan was touched when she heard that. The Big Ice Cube was so considerate. He even guessed that she would wake up hungry in the middle of the night. She cast a grateful look at the big ice block, but the other party was unperturbed. She didn't say much. The most important thing now was to feed her stomach. But when she sat at the table, she looked at her tightly bandaged hands and felt troubled. At this time, Xiao Su had already walked over with a cloak in his hand. He reached out and draped it over her shoulders, then tied the rope. Then, he took the spoon on the table, took the rice bowl, and scooped the rice to her lips. Everything seemed to be practiced countless times, and he did it smoothly without any pause. Perhaps she was already used to his actions. Chu Qingyan obediently opened her mouth and ate the food, then wolfed it down. Xiao Su watched her eat a mouthful and then stared at him. Xiao Su felt that she was really starving. After 2 bowls of rice, Chu Qingyan felt full. She waved her hand, indicating that she didn't want any more. She felt that her table manners were too ugly, but she had no choice but to trouble the big ice cube. After drinking a bowl of soup, Chu Qingyan remembered something. Big ice cube, did you take your medicine today? Chu Qingyan was relieved when she heard that. After sleeping, she was much more energetic and quiet. She thought of today's training, and couldn't help but be angry and curious. Big Ice Cube, how did you train Xiao cavalry in the past? Twice as strict as your current training. Xiao Su recalled that when he first formed Xiao cavalry, he was only a 10-year-old child. Really? Chu Qingyan felt that her training was already considered harsh. Now that she heard him say that, she couldn't help but sympathize with Big Face and the others. Yes, it has been 10 years since the formation of Xiao cavalry. Turin, Mu Ling and the others joined when they were 7 or 8 years old. Most of them are orphans, but they have strong minds and can endure hardships. They can endure torture that ordinary people can't endure, so in my training, they were able to survive through layers of elimination. Just like sand being washed away by waves, he wanted elites, not people who were just there to make up the numbers. So in the end, when his team appeared, it caused everyone to tremble in fear. 1 against 10 was a conservative estimate. They all had their own strengths, and when they were together, they were an extremely powerful army. When they were separated, they were all sharp arrows that could fight independently. Because she had eaten and slept well, her spirit was very good. She pestered him to ask about how he trained Hua Ling and the others. When she learned that in order to let Turin and the others quickly learn Qinggong, the person in charge of training threw them directly from the top of the cliff, and then they each relied on their own ability to fall to the bottom of the cliff, Chu Qingyan patted her chest and rejoiced. It seemed that flowing light was still kind to her. And whether it was eating or sleeping, each of them had to carry at least 100 pounds of weight. At that time, they were still teenagers who were not even 10 years old, so one could imagine how difficult the process was. At that time, Big Ice Cube was right. He wanted elites, so this kind of harsh training was unavoidable. Chu Qingyan knew because Big Ice Cube was also like this. Maybe the way he grew up was even more difficult than anyone else in Xiao cavalry. Chu Qingyan guessed correctly. Xiao Su was the same as Xiao cavalry. They ate, lived, and trained together. Their master shared their joys and sorrows, which only stimulated their passion for training, and they wouldn't complain. It was also because of this that Xiao Su's prestige in their hearts was so high, and he became an unshakable god. Why did you want to establish Xiao cavalry? Chu Qingyan asked seriously. At that time, he was only 10 years old. How could he have such a long-term vision? Xiao Su was silent for a while, and then slowly said, because I wanted to live. At that time, he was still young and had a fear of death. But there were so many people around him who covetously wanted to take his life. From a young age, his sense of crisis was very strong. In addition to that fire at the age of 10, it burned away the last bit of trust in his heart, so he needed a group of people that belonged to him. He woke up from his memories and casually asked, then why did you agree to them and practice martial arts so hard? What? At such a young age, he was already thinking about how to live. Chu Qingyan's heart ached, and her nose was unusually sour. She felt bad for him. Hearing his question, her eyes couldn't help but surge with a strange emotion. She didn't answer him directly, but asked him back, guess. Xiao Su wasn't interested in playing a guessing game with her. He got up and carried her back to the bed, covered her with a blanket, and indicated for her to sleep early as they still had to wake up early tomorrow. Chu Qingyan looked at the person who walked to the candlestick and blew out the flame, and her lips curled up. Big Ice Cube, I've always been working so hard for you. Chapter 511. Chu Qingyan arrived at the foot of the mountain early in the morning as promised. Lu Guang was already waiting there. At this time, his expression was even more tired than yesterday. Chu Qingyan didn't know why, but she didn't ask. She was even more grateful. He was so busy, but he still took the time to teach her. It was already very good. She had to cherish the opportunity to teach him. At this time, Lu Guang's thoughts were, Wu, Master punished him to climb the mountain in the middle of the night again. He said that if he didn't reach the top of a mountain in 10 minutes, he would go to Turin to receive his punishment. He didn't even sleep for 2 hours last night. Master was really too protective of little Wang Fei. Wasn't it just a few scratches yesterday? Compared to them in the past, it was considered light, all right? With yesterday's experience, Chu Qingyan's climb today was much smoother. She spent less time than yesterday, but it was mainly to increase her speed and to control her body's balance. When she went down the mountain, even though she was still a little scared, she didn't need Lu Guang's help anymore. However, she almost fell down several times. Every time she stabbed the knife into the cliff with one hand and swung her legs in the air, her heart was thrown up countless times. Looking at the clouds and mist below, she couldn't see the bottom of the abyss. Her scalp tightened. After climbing the mountain 4 or 5 times a day, Chu Qingyan finally returned to the courtyard when the first rays of the morning sun appeared. Returning to the courtyard meant that a new wave of training was about to begin. Qing Gua crossed his arms and looked at her with an enigmatic smile. Little Wang Fei, I've been waiting for you for a long time. We can start now. Seeing his smile, Chu Qingyan felt that he was up to no good. She nodded hesitantly. Then Qing Gua took her to an empty space. This empty space was no longer the same as before. There were plum blossom stakes nailed to it. The shortest one was taller than Chu Qingyan. This is... Chu Qingyan gaped. It wasn't for her to practice the plum blossom stakes, right? Qingguan nodded and started with a comment. From yesterday's sparring, young Wang Fei's moves are too slow, her movements aren't agile enough, her body isn't flexible enough, and her moves are too few and simple. It's easy for the opponent to figure out her moves. After giving the comment, he explained his intentions. So this subordinate specially set up the plum blossom stakes. When you are familiar with the plum blossom stakes, this subordinate will teach you how to punch on it. Chu Qingyan's mouth twitched. It felt so difficult. Young princess consort, you can go up and familiarize yourself first. You have half an hour. After saying that, Qinghua pushed her forward. Chu Qingyan had no choice but to bite the bullet and get off the horse. She tapped her toes lightly and flew up. When she landed on the first wooden stake, she lost her balance and fell down. Only one foot was allowed to stand on each plum blossom pile, so she lost her balance and fell. Again. Green Melon waved her hand and ordered her to go up. Chu Qingyan got up from the ground and continued to climb up without saying anything. 1 time, 2 times, 3 times. Chu Qingyan didn't know how many times she fell before she was finally able to stand firmly on the plum blossom piles. Walk a few laps. Qinghua didn't give her any time to breathe as he ordered again. Chu Qingyan swayed as she carefully walked. Suddenly, a whip fell from the sky and hit the plum blossom pile under her feet. She was so scared that she almost fell down again. Are you being a thief if you cower? Let go of your hands and feet and run without worry. Qinghua's stern voice sounded in her ears. This teacher was so fierce. And he was a two-faced person. Before the training, he was all kinds of amiable to her, but once the training started, he turned hostile. Chu Qingyan didn't dare to disobey and immediately started running. Unfortunately, she fell on the first step. Ha! Chu Qingyan fell like a dog gnawing on snow. Before she could spit out the snow in her mouth, she heard a large group of people laughing beside her. Chu Qingyan raised her head and saw that there was a large group of fierce cavalry around the plum blossom piles. They were either hugging their shoulders, leaning against a tree trunk, or standing carelessly. They couldn't hide the smile on their faces as they commented on her. Chu Qingyan's face darkened. Were they all here to watch her make a fool of herself? Just as she stood up, a long whip flew over and hit her feet. Then she heard Qinghua's merciless reprimand. You fell on the ground and can't get up? You're too bad. Go up and continue. Recently, the most she heard was nothing more than, "You lost. You're too bad. How can you be so stupid? You're hopeless. You can't do it." She was a proud daughter of heaven since she was young. Every time she studied and took an exam, she would get the teacher's praise, parents' gratification, and classmates' envy. But here, everything was shattered. Anyone could easily crush you. Anyone could say that you're too bad to be saved. Anyone could throw a tantrum at you and ridicule you. Your outlook on life, values, and worldview were all overturned at this moment. Everything that you were proud of, and relied on in the past was all destroyed at this moment. Was she really that lousy? So bad that everyone would look at her with disdain. Chu Qingyan stood there silently. The onlookers also gradually quieted down. They looked at each other. Did they go overboard? Were they too rough? The young princess consort was still too young. Were they wrong? The atmosphere suddenly became oppressive, as if waiting for something to explode. Qinghua, who was holding a long whip, pursed his lips. He was done for. If he angered the young princess consort and made her cry, Master would definitely not let him off. Was he still going to hit the sandbag tonight? His hands were trembling from last night's beating. Just as everyone was scratching their heads, they heard Chu Qingyan take a deep breath, and then, she raised her head and looked at Qinghua. Her face revealed a bright smile, and her tone was firm and confident. "Qinghua, just you wait. I will definitely defeat you." The person in front of him smiled confidently, as if she had 1,000 rays of light. It was so dazzling that people didn't dare to look straight at her. Qinghua loosened his grip on the long whip. He raised his eyebrows and provoked her. "This subordinate will wait. Now, please get on the stake and practice your stance well before we discuss this problem." Chu Qingyan pursed her lips. "Shouldn't you be praising me for my great ambition? This subordinate only knows how to criticize and not praise. Only a strict teacher can produce a brilliant student." When he finished speaking, the long whip also fell. Chu Qingyan dodged the whip and flew onto the plum blossom stake, practicing her stance again. The onlookers looked at the petite person on the plum blossom stake and couldn't help but reveal a faint smile of appreciation. Dreams were plump, but reality was bony. When she fell down again, Chu Qingyan fell heavily on the ground. Her knees seemed to have bruised from the fall. She stood up indifferently. Just as she was about to get on the stake again, her eyes inadvertently caught a glimpse of a black sleeve. She paused and turned around. Her eyes met with a pair of black eyes. She was slightly stunned. She didn't expect the big ice cube to come to the cultivation courtyard. She smiled at him and let him go back. Her quick-witted eyes were as clear as water, as if they could speak. "Don't look, I'm fine. It doesn't hurt at all." Chapter 5:12. Xiao Su stood under the tree and watched her smile at him. Then she turned back and continued to jump on the plum blossom pile. He watched her fall again and again, but she didn't cry out in pain. His heart was like the sea, rising and falling again and again, but he forced it down. "Master!" Turin stood next to him and followed his line of sight to see the young princess who was training in front. His face was a little nervous. Just now, his master said that he was just taking a walk, and he walked here. The first thing he saw was the scene of the young princess being scolded by Qinghua. At that moment, he felt the coldness from his master that was different from the cold winter. It was the kind of coldness that came from his master's bones. If it wasn't for his good self-control, he couldn't help but want to rub the goosebumps on his arms. Although his master didn't say anything, his eyes showed pity. Even a person without good eyesight could see it. To be able to make a person who usually didn't show his emotions reveal an expression that even a person without good eyesight could see, he couldn't help but realize one thing. That was, the position of the young princess in his master's heart was not as simple as just being valued. "How many sandbags did Qinghua hit last night?" Xiao Su asked. "I fought 6 and broke 3. It seemed that master was thinking about green gourd again. Let him continue," Xiao Su ordered. Yes. Turin felt that his men's skills would improve rapidly during this period of time because they had a strict master who was impartial. "What's the next training?" Xiao Su's line of sight didn't leave the person on the plum blossom pile. Turin thought for a while. It seems to be archery. Xiao Su nodded. Bring a chair over. Turin was slightly surprised. Was his master planning to watch the young princess train from the side? But according to the training method of Shaolai cavalry, the young princess wouldn't have a good time. At that time, the people who were responsible for teaching would be the ones who would suffer. Because the pain was in the young princess' body, the pain was in his master's heart. Turin didn't dare to delay any longer. He ordered people to bring a table and chairs, as well as some refreshments. At this time, Chu Qingyan was still fighting with the plum blossom pile. Suddenly she smelled the fragrance of the plum blossom cake. She couldn't help but look over. She had eaten a lot this morning, but she couldn't withstand the physical exhaustion. At this time, she was almost starving. Chu Qingyan was shocked at first. Didn't she tell him not to look? Why is he still here? Also, was he trying to seduce her? Chu Qingyan glared at him fiercely. She was going through so much trouble here, but he was enjoying himself while eating and drinking. Chu Qingyan decided not to look at him anymore and focused on dealing with the plum blossom piles. Half an hour later, Chu Qingyan had basically stabilized herself and was able to walk freely on the plum blossom piles. So Qinghua waved his hand to have her go down to rest. He went up to the plum blossom piles. This subordinate is practicing the 6 stars fist. Please watch carefully. This subordinate will only practice it twice. Whether you can remember it or not depends on you. When his voice fell, Qinghua started to practice. Qinghua said as he indicated, the 6 stars fist specialty is using stillness to overcome hardness with softness. The main moves include hitting the opponent's acupuncture points and locking the opponent's joints. After Qinghua finished practicing it twice, he had Chu Qingyan come up to practice by herself. Maybe it was due to the fact that Turin had also practiced it twice before letting her figure it out by herself. So now, she could basically keep up with this unusual training method. She reviewed Qinggua's movements before she started to imitate it. Qinghua watched her movements and gave pointers below. There are only 3 main moves. The body has to turn quickly, lead with the head, can't stop, and the feet have to be steady. Use the belt as the arm, the forearm is nimble, and the rhythm has to be fast. The point of force is used on the back of the fist or the forearm. If she made a mistake once, she would be greeted with Qinggua's whip. Chu Qingyan could only concentrate and do her best. The morning passed just like that. She was barely able to complete a set of fist techniques from beginning to end. She collapsed on the chair next to Xiao Su, panting weakly. Xiao Su poured a glass of water and put it in front of her. His voice was cold and indifferent. Your performance is barely satisfactory. Obviously, she had tried her best to collapse, but instead of being comforted, she was criticized by him. Chu Qingyan's heart was filled with a ball of nameless fire. But when she turned her eyes and was about to get angry, she met his calm gaze. Chu Qingyan felt that her anger was suddenly extinguished. 4 big ice cube to be able to become the all-powerful Ing King, and for the valiant cavalry to be able to become the elites under his leadership, it was all because of his hard work, dedication, talent, and diligence. She just suffered a little and felt that she was amazing. In fact, compared to him, she was nothing. She was discouraged. She didn't care if others said that she was bad or weak. But the person she cared about the most, with just a casual sentence, was able to throw her into the abyss and destroy the confidence she had built up with great difficulty. She twisted her fingers and did not say a word. Xiao Su could feel the loneliness emitted from her body and sighed. He had always been known for being strict. During training, he would only criticize and never praise, so the fierce cavalry did not dare to be rash in front of him. Now that he was here to watch her practice, it was already an exception. Her performance was not bad, but many of his subordinates were peeking at him from the corner. He could not be biased towards her, so he said that sentence. But he did not expect that it would be so lethal to her. He was silent for a moment, then raised his hand in front of everyone's dumbstruck eyes and covered his lowered head. His sharp eyes became gentle, and his tone was not as cold as before, but it doesn't matter. If you don't accumulate steps, you won't reach 1,000 miles. If you don't accumulate small streams, you won't become a river. Chu Qingyan was encouraged by him, and the faint sorrow in her heart instantly receded. She raised her head and smiled at him with squinted eyes. A steed leaps, but cannot take 10 steps. A horse can take 10 rides, but it is not willing to give up. If you give up, rotten wood will not break. If you persevere, you can carve gold and stone. I will remember it. Hearing her recite it so fluently, Xiao Su could not help but smile. Go, practice well. I will definitely not disappoint you. Chu Qingyan waved her small fist at him, expressing her determination, and then quickly walked towards the other training ground. Ioyo, fierce cavalry who was in the corner, couldn't help but cover his eyes when he saw this scene, but the gap between his fingers was still aimed at the two of them. It was their first time seeing such a gentle and lecturing master. Other than being shocked, they were also envious. If their master had treated them with such gentleness, then their skills would have soared by leaps and bounds. What a pity, what a pity. But after half a day, a cold gaze swept over, and everyone acted as if nothing had happened and immediately dispersed. Sigh, this is the difference. Chapter 5:13. After practicing fist techniques, it was time to learn archery. After archery, it was time to learn riding. After riding, it was time to learn leg techniques, swordsmanship, whip. The bow that Big Face gave her was for military use. Normally, only big men could pull it. The first time Chu Qingyan touched it, her fingers were already scratched. This body belonged to the soft and tender type. Once she touched the bowstring, her fingers were cut and bleeding. However, she did not frown once. She still maintained her posture and pulled the bow again and again. This forbearance made Big Face very satisfied. He taught her even more attentively. After a whole day, Chu Qingyan went through all the classes. Aside from being tired from the heavy burden on her body, what she gained was that there was always someone better than her. These fierce cavalry were famous because they had the ability. However, this kind of achievement relied on their own hard work. If it was not a person with a strong will, they would not be able to endure the fierce cavalry's training method. Chu Qingyan admired them even more, because they had more perseverance, patience, and strength than ordinary people. So no matter how hard and tiring the training was, she did not say it out loud. Instead, she suppressed this pain in her heart and turned it into motivation. Falling down was for the sake of getting up better. Just like this, day after day passed by. In the mountains, there was no cold or heat. Every night, snow would rustle on the ground. The next day, snow would cover the entire mountain range, so much so that the mountain was sealed for a long time. During this time, Chu Qingyan woke up early and slept late. She did not relax at all. Her nerves were tense as she practiced martial arts. Her body was faintly changing. For example, her body was growing taller and her mental state was different. She did not notice these, but the people who watched her work hard to grow step by step felt that her body was gradually emitting a dazzling light. They were sincerely envious and admired her. Because to be able to persevere under the fierce cavalry's training for so long, it was already very rare. Moreover, to be able to make these fierce men give her a thumbs up behind her back was even rarer. So, with effort there will always be gains. Although the schedule was tight, Chu Qingyan was already enjoying it. After training a mountain, Liu Guang gave her a few more mountains, each taller and steeper than the previous one. At that time, she heard flowing light rubbing his chin and saying sneakily, "Only here with so many mountains can I be willful. Little princess, you are so lucky." Lucky my ass. She was teased by Qinghua again and fell off the plum blossom pile. She ate a few mouthfuls of snow, but she heard him laughing at her from the pile. "Little princess consort, your lower body isn't steady enough. You still need to work harder." Unstable my ass. Then, in her anger, she would chase after him and beat him up. Although she was beaten black and blue every time, her fist technique had unknowingly improved. She was already very proficient in drawing the bow and loading the arrow. She had gone from missing the target at the beginning to not missing the target at all. Although she still couldn't hit the target with great precision, she could at least hit the target within 50 meters. Because her arm strength was not enough, Big Face asked Mu Ling to help him make a round iron ball for her to play with. Chu Qingyan still remembered that when she took the iron ball back to the room, she threw it casually and smashed a hole in the table, which scared Xining. Cicada was a man of few words and started to fight as soon as he came up. He was not ashamed of bullying the weak at all. Every time, he would beat her to the ground and then hook his finger to make her stand up again. Therefore, in Cicada's swordsmanship class, she kept repeating the action of being beaten to the ground, but each time, she persisted a little longer than the previous time. Bang! Chu Qingyan was thrown out of the plum blossom pile again. Her left face was swollen. She spat out blood, then stood up and jumped on the plum blossom pile. Again! Cough, cough. Falling heavily to the ground, Chu Qingyan held the long sword against the ground and slowly stood up. Looking at her torn sleeve, her eyes flashed with excitement. Again! Swish! When she flew up the mountain, Chu Qingyan was attacked by flowing light again and again. When she fell, she turned around and found a safe place to rest and then said to him, "Again!" Therefore, during that period of time, when she was constantly beaten to the ground by them, or when her practice was not satisfactory, she repeated these two words the most. Little by little, it was progress. She always told herself this: pain and happiness. The paint on the longbow had been worn off by her, but she still put it on the bowstring one after another. As for the uncooperative horse, it had been trained by her to be obedient. It did not dare to go west, and it did not dare to go north. Her archery and riding skills had improved to a certain extent. On the training ground, even if she was bleeding and sweating, she would never cry. However, when she returned to the room and closed the door, she could not help but moan and sob to her big ice cube when she saw the wounds all over her body. Sob, sob, my little arms and elbows are bruised again and again. They are so ugly. Sob, sob, my palms have calluses. Can you imagine that this is the hand of a young girl? Sob, sob, big ice cube, training is so tiring. I want to be comforted, I want to be hugged. In front of others, she was an indestructible woman. When she was injured, when she was bullied, she did not make a sound. In front of others, she was a weak little girl who was afraid of pain. She acted coquettishly, complained, and only wanted to rub in his arms. Then, the next day, she would walk to the training ground full of energy. She could be weak, she could be afraid, she could complain, but she would only show this side of her to the people closest to her. Because of the venting after she returned home and closed the door, Chu Qingyan did not have any negative emotions in her heart. When she trained during the day, it was twice the result with half the effort. However, she did not know that because of her actions, the fierce cavalry suffered unspeakably during this period of time. They did not know why, but the young princess had gradually entered a good state, but the master's expression was getting worse and worse. Then they received more and more punishment. During this period of time, the young princess's muscles and bones were strong, she was energetic, and her steps were light. On the other hand, they were thin, their energy was not enough, and their steps were erratic. Who did they offend? The fierce cavalry howled to the sky in their hearts. However, they did not know that the real culprit was training unhurriedly under their eyes. Chu Qingyan also did not know that her unintentional actions caused them to suffer unspeakably at night training. If she knew, she thought that she would cry harder. At this time, she had faintly revealed the nature of a black-bellied person. The days flew by, and it was already the day to leave the snow mountain. However, what followed closely was an extremely important test for Chu Qingyan. It was to finish and review the training during this period of time. Chapter 5:14. Tomorrow, we will be leaving for Shang country. Before that, we, the fierce cavalry, will be holding a test to assess the little princess consort's training during this period of time. The earth spirit was dressed in black. As the host of the test, he had a dignified appearance, fair and strict. On the training ground, there were not only Xiao cavalry, but also Chu Qingyan's parents, Qing Yanluo, Yiling Feng, and others. They also wanted to see how much progress Chu Qingyan had made during this period. They were looking forward to seeing whether or not this person, who was constantly creating surprises for others, would break through their imaginations and bring them surprises again today? Equestrian and archery skills, and lightness skills were placed last. Because they had to move to another place, this place was not suitable. Therefore, the test topics were fist skills, swordsmanship, leg skills, equestrian skills, archery skills, and lightness skills. Both sides can stop here. You can start now. Turin said. Little princess, sorry to offend you. Standing in front of her was Qinghua. Chu Qingyan cupped her hands. Please. As soon as she finished speaking, Chu Qingyan took the lead to punch. Her fist was powerful, but it was caught by Qinghua. Then he raised his hand and punched. There was a big gap in strength between men and women. She did not choose to fight with force. Instead, she used her body's flexibility to slide under his body and then punched again. The two fought for a long time. Chu Qingyan began to lose, but she was not in a hurry. Her expression was still calm. Just when Qinghua was about to win, Chu Qingyan suddenly raised her leg and swept across his legs. He was caught off guard, and Qinghua was defeated. Little princess, you didn't follow the rules. We are competing with fist skills. You can't use leg skills. Qinghua was not convinced. Chu Qingyan got up and withdrew her leg. She brushed the dust on her clothes and smiled slyly. Did you say that I can't use any moves other than fist skills? It's right that I won. Qinghua was stunned. Indeed, there were no rules, but he taught her fist skills. This young princess consort didn't play her cards according to common sense, which was why he had fallen into her trap. However, she was right about one thing. The purpose of a competition was to win. She had won, and this was the result. Xiao Su looked at the little guy who was smiling like a fox and couldn't help but curve his lips. The battlefield was ever-changing. No one would wait for you to finish your fist art and then ask you if you wanted to use your leg art. Only those who were flexible and adaptable could survive to the end. Cicada stood in front of Chu Qingyan. In his hand was a black iron sword that weighed 50 kilograms, while in Chu Qingyan's hand was a soft sword. When Cicada saw the sword in her hand, he could not help but frown. A soft sword against a black iron sword. She was overestimating herself. Chu Qingyan ignored his disdain. With a flick of her wrist, the flexible sword immediately emitted a sharp aura. Both of them attacked at the same time. Cicada had been by Xiao Su's side for nearly 10 years. His martial arts had been taught by Xiao Su. After so many years of fighting and risking his life with him, his swordsmanship was fast, accurate, and ruthless. It was aimed at the fatal parts of his opponent. If he was not careful, his moves would be enough to kill his opponent. However, at this time, the two of them had already exchanged more than 10 moves. Chu Qingyan used her soft sword to move like a dragon and snake in his black iron sword. Although she was at a disadvantage, she did not show any signs of defeat. Cicada went from looking down on her earlier to being completely focused at this time. The little princess's sword moves were taught by him. However, she had already learned the heaven and earth sword and the fire sword. She had a good control of them. Now, after his training, she had merged these sword moves together. It seemed to have become her own swordsmanship. It had their ruthlessness and also her unique gentleness. Xiao Su's gaze was locked on her every move. After a moment, he could not help but smile. This little girl was very smart. She knew how to use gentleness to overcome strength. Otherwise, with her short cultivation in half a year, it would not be enough to defeat Cicada's swordsmanship over the past decade. After 30 moves, both of them put away their swords. In this assessment, Cicada had set the standard for her to be able to complete 30 moves under his sword. She had done it. Cicada looked at the person in front of him and smiled. The little princess has a very high level of comprehension. If not for the short training time, I'm afraid that in time, the student will surpass the master. A few days ago, she could not even withstand 3 moves under his hands. Now she could do this. He had to say that she had improved very quickly. Chu Qingyan touched her head, feeling a little embarrassed. In fact, in terms of swordsmanship, she was not as good as Cicada. It was only because she was good at thinking and used her strengths to attack his weaknesses. If they exchanged a few more moves, she would definitely be defeated. The second round of assessment ended, and the third round of assessment followed closely behind. She competed in leg techniques with 7-star. Standing in front of her was a delicate and pretty youth. If his identity was not mentioned, anyone would misunderstand him as a young master from some aristocratic family just by standing there quietly. Chu Qingyan had also been deceived by his appearance before, but when he taught her cultivation techniques, she had a completely different understanding of him. A knife was hidden behind a smile, and his attacks were ruthless, especially his legs. She heard that when he was fighting with Big Ice Cube, he had sent the enemy's deputy general's head flying with one kick. There was no need to describe how formidable he was. Because of Big Face's example, 7-star allowed her to use all of her skills. Chu Qingyan felt a lot of pressure from his calm composure. In this case, it would be a close-range fight. She could win against Big Face earlier because she caught him off guard, but 7-star had already figured out her moves, which was clearly disadvantageous to her. Moreover, her disadvantage was that she was not as strong as a man, but her advantage was that she was petite. The two of them fought. Chu Qingyan raised her leg to attack 7-star's lower body very quickly. She couldn't fight a protracted battle and had to end it quickly, or else she would be at his mercy. As though he saw through Chu Qingyan's thoughts, 7-star chuckled and raised his leg to meet hers. The two of them exchanged 3 moves before separating. Chu Qingyan felt a dull pain in her leg. This person was truly sparing no effort. She gritted her teeth and met him again, but this time, she didn't just use her legs to fight. She also used the fist techniques she learned from Big Face. Because Chu Qingyan made it clear from the start that he wouldn't use fist techniques against her, Chu Qingyan barely managed to turn the tables. But not long after, Chu Qingyan was beaten to the ground by 7-star. Because it was just a competition, 7-star restrained his strength when he attacked, so Chu Qingyan wasn't injured. Although she lost, she was already very satisfied that she could persevere until now. Meanwhile, 7-star had a whole new level of respect for her. This subordinate didn't expect little princess to be so proficient in the leg techniques this subordinate taught you in such a short period of time. This subordinate agrees with Cicada's earlier words. As long as you are willing to study and practice diligently, you will surpass little princess in the future. They had spent several years to achieve this, but the little consort had shattered everyone's expectations. She had surpassed them in a year and a half in a few days. It could be said that she was much more impressive than them. Chu Qingyan had endured their mockery these past few days, so she felt a bit awkward when she heard them praising her in all seriousness. They should just mock her, she would get used to it. Chapter 5:15. Even though Chu Qingyan lost in the 3rd round, she still received everyone's affirmation. In fact, winning or losing this test was not very important to them. The most important thing was to see how much their little princess had grown in this period of time. But it was clear that after these 3 rounds, Xiao Lai-chi was satisfied. It was reasonable but also not reasonable. Inverted scallion. See, I told you that our Kai Kai is amazing. Do you understand now? Father Chu was holding a plate and eating with relish. He was also watching with relish. There was no trace of the nervousness he had when his daughter was taking the test. Xiao Su replied mildly. He had always known, which was why he endured the heartache as he watched her cry out in pain in his arms day after day. She cried as she threw herself into his arms, but did not say how difficult it was. When she left his arms, she had already wiped her tears and resolutely threw herself into the 2nd day of training. Sometimes she was so strong that it made one's heart ache. But a fledgling had to learn to fly. The only thing he could do was to let her go and let her fly. It was rare for Yi Lingfeng to go out today. For the past few days, he had been alone in his room. Now that he saw Chu Qingyan, whom he had not seen for a few days, he could not help but turn to Xiao Su and say, "I realize that you really found a treasure." His tone was teasing, and he was in a rare good mood. Hearing this, Xiao Su calmly accepted it. Yi Lingfeng didn't expect him to be so thick-skinned, but his eyes suddenly dimmed. In fact, he didn't need to be envious of others. He had also met a treasure before, but he didn't cherish it and was instead chased away. He could only blame himself for reaping what he sowed. Perhaps sensing his good friend's desolation, Xiao Su thought for a moment and said, "The mountains have been sealed by the heavy snow for the past few days. The news from Shang Kingdom did not arrive in time. If there is news of Miss Dugu, I will inform you immediately." There was no need for thanks between good friends. Yi Lingfeng nodded. Next was the combination of horsemanship and swordsmanship. The venue was outside the courtyard. The rule was that Chu Qing was riding a horse and shooting at a moving target. All arrows had to hit the bullseye to pass. Chu Qingyan leaped onto the fierce horse. It was said that this horse was the most ferocious of all the mounts that Xiao Lai rode. Back when she was learning horsemanship from Sweet Potato, she had spent close to 2 days just to tame this horse. She had used carrots and grass to entice it. She had put in a lot of effort to make it happy before she finally managed to tame it. It was not easy. At this time, she was carrying a long bow on her shoulder, and a quiver was hanging on the horse's back. There were 10 long arrows in the quiver. She then patted the horse's back and smiled. "Buddy, it's up to you now." The horse whinnied and rubbed against her hand obediently. "Oh, I really didn't expect the little princess to have such a trick up her sleeve. Among us, except for Sweet Potato, I haven't seen anyone who can make Hongyu lower her head." Big Face sighed. "That's because I taught her well." Sweet Potato interrupted from the side, feeling proud. "You taught her well, but can it be better than the fist technique that I taught the little princess?" Green Gourd said with his chin raised. Yes. You taught her the best." Even the master was defeated by his disciple. Sweet Potato couldn't help but mock him. Green Gourd snorted. "That still proves that I taught her well. The student has surpassed the master, right?" Everyone burst into laughter. "All right, stop arguing. Let's watch this round of assessment first." The brawny man interrupted them, indicating for them to watch Chu Qingyan's performance. At this time, the moving targets were already moving. Those targets were tied to the animals that Xiao Lai rode over. There were rabbits, foxes, minks, leopards, birds. As long as there were animals in this mountain, they were all caught by them. But there were only 10 of them. If Chu Qingyan accidentally let them escape, it would mean that she didn't pass the assessment. When the targets moved, Chu Qingyan also moved. She pulled an arrow, pulled the bow, and released the arrow. Her movements were fluid and smooth. In an instant, the target on the cheetah that ran the fastest was shot by her. Her apprenticeship was successful. Chu Qingyan held the reins with one hand and clamped the horse's belly with both hands. She urged Hongyu to quickly run towards the targets. In the process of running, she quickly pulled the bow and shot 3 arrows in a row. All of them hit the targets. She picked up the arrows quickly, aimed accurately, and released the bowstring decisively. This performance made everyone nod. Even if they didn't know the results of the target shooting, seeing her performance on horseback already made Big Face and the others satisfied. Moreover, she was skilled in riding the horse. Whether it was temporarily turning the horse's head or slowing down, Hongyu was very cooperative. This made Sweet Potato, the real owner, couldn't help but feel jealous. His Hongyu wouldn't abandon him like this, right? She shot 10 arrows in a row, all of them hitting the bullseye. Chu Qingyan handed in a satisfactory equestrian archery answer sheet. Big Face and Sweet Potato expressed that they were very proud. This was their disciple. Chu Qingyan sat on the horse and turned to face Xiao Su with a bright smile. There was only 1 round left. Qinggong went up the mountain. Everyone came to the highest peak here. Chu Qingyan pulled up her sleeves and tightened her belt. Then she nodded to Flowing Light and jumped up. Xining, who was watching, couldn't help but cover her eyes. It was too scary. What if Master fell down? As soon as this thought came to her, she spat on the ground. She couldn't curse Master like this. At this time, everyone was silent. Xining looked up again. At this time, the weather was clear and the clouds were not as thick as before. When she looked up, she could see the white figure easily jumping on the cliff. In the blink of an eye, she had flown a long distance. From the foot of the mountain to the mountainside, the figure slowly shrank and finally became a black dot. Then, when she went up, she could no longer be seen. Xining was stunned. Chen Yanluo, who was standing at the side, smacked her lips. This little girl is really extraordinary. After a while, someone said, young princess consort has reached the top of the mountain. It took her less than half an hour. That year, it took me a month to do it. Young princess consort is really strong. As soon as the voice fell, someone exclaimed, she's coming down. Chu Qingyan didn't stay on the top of the mountain for long. After jumping to the top, she turned and jumped down. Her feet stepped on the uneven parts of the mountain and quickly fell down step by step. The corner of her clothes fluttered, and there was only the sound of the wind in her ears. She narrowed her eyes and skillfully sensed the direction of the wind. This was what flowing light taught her. She could use the force to fight and also use it to fly. The white figure was getting closer and closer to the ground. Xiao Su looked up and saw her descending from the sky. Her clothes fluttered, her smile was beautiful, her eyes were bright, and her tied black hair fluttered behind her. Stepping on the air, she was like a fairy from the ninth heaven. His little phoenix finally spread her wings. You're tuning in to the Passion Pages YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.